Welcome everyone to a council meeting tonight. As always, I want to thank the media and the supporting sponsors for reporting on all our meetings. Mayor Provenzano is away on a conference today, so I'm your person here tonight. And I am, you know who I am. Before we get the meeting started, Mr. Ver, my understanding is you have someone to introduce.
Yes, thank you, Acting Mayor Nero. I wanted to introduce to Council and the general public, we had a new employee start today, Mr. Brent Lamming. Brent will be our Director of Community Services. He comes to us, previously he was the CEO of Community First Credit Union, and before that he worked at Algoma Steel as a Superintendent of Materials Reprocessing. So we're thrilled to have him join the ranks at City Hall here, and he'll be a big addition to our team in the community services area.
Great. Brent, Mr. Lamming, welcome to the Corporation of the City of Sault Ste. Marie. A few words, if you will.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here, continuing to serve the community in a different type of fashion than the steel or the banking sector, but I'm very excited to be here with everyone and to help execute the strategic plan of Sault Ste. Marie and serving our community in general. So thanks for having me here at the city, and look forward to working with everyone as we move forward.
Great, and we look forward to working with you as well.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. White.
Mr. Acting Mayor and members of Council, under the adoption of minutes, a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Turco, resolved that the minutes of the regular Council meeting of 2018-02-20 be approved.
All in favor? It's carried.
Mr. Acting Mayor, I believe there's a couple of councillors who want to say some words.
A couple of councillors on the agenda item number 2. Let's start with Councillor Butland.
Thanks, Mr. Acting Mayor. I received a call from the daughter in Kamloops, British Columbia, asking me if I had watched the Oscars last night, and I said I was in and out. Your mother watched a lot of it, or all of it, but the daughter said, well, a person from Sault Ste. Marie won an Oscar last night, Paul Osterberry, and she was in his class in grade 13. You see, he is a graduate of Sir James Dunn, and he won Best Production Design for the movie The Shape of Water. And he's been in this business for quite a while, but obviously he's reached a pinnacle of success in his chosen field. And it says here, it brought the object of what he does is bringing the movie to life. So indeed, this is a great achievement for someone from Sault Ste. Marie so we need to acknowledge him, and hopefully we can perhaps pass on some communication to him, just how pleased we are. Thanks, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Thank you for that acknowledgement, Councillor Butland. Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I just want to remind Council and the public at large that Council has approved funding for this first ever Sioux Summit, which is going to take place on April the 21st in Toronto. I wanted to bring this to the attention of the public, a reminder that right now the committee organizing this locally, and I want to recognize Sandra Hollingsworth and Tom Ver and his staff at the EDC and the Innovation Center for their work so far. We've gotten to the point now where the invitations, the initial 50 invitations have gone out to those people who we've invited, and those people are primarily expatriates from the Sioux who have accomplished themselves in their field, primarily in business, and we're trying to bring them together in Toronto on April the 21st to have a summit to discuss future economic prosperity for Sault Ste. Marie. The reason I'm bringing this up today is because we may not have all of the initial 50 invitees attending, schedule conflicts, etc. So we're reaching out to the general public. If there are any names of people we may have omitted, if you have a name that you would like to bring forward, we certainly would encourage you to bring that name forward. We may have already invited them, so there's no guarantee that, you know, we can use the names. They could have been already invited. But any names that you feel should be brought forward, we certainly would accept them. And I also encourage council, if you've thought of anybody or you're thinking of anybody, please pass that name on. You can send it to me. I'll give you my email address, p.christian@cityssm.on.ca. So that's April the 21st. And these are people that, again, that are primarily in the Greater Toronto area. So I encourage anybody, if you have a name, please bring it forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks for that update, Councillor Christian. Mr. White?
Under agenda item 3, declarations of pecuniary interest.
Councillor Bruni?
5.1, place of employment.
Thank you. Councillor Shoemaker?
Agenda item 6.7, client to the law firm at which I work.
Councillor Turco?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. 6.8, municipal law enforcement officers, spouse employed by police services, and related bylaw as well.
Councillor Christian?
6.3, municipal election administration. I'm employed with the Algoma District School Board.
Councillor Shoemaker?
Yes, sorry, along with 6.7, there's a bylaw, 2018-41, which I'm also in conflict on for the same reason.
Is that it, Council? And Council, I will be declaring a conflict on the OLG presentation. My son is employed by OLG. Councillor Christian?
And I guess I'm going to declare a conflict on 5.1. My wife is employed by OLG.
All right, any other conflicts?
Under agenda item 4, approve agenda as presented. Council, one note, I believe you've already been informed. Agenda item 6.11 is being withdrawn from this agenda. Mr. Bear did come into possession of some more material information after the authoring of this report. He will be therefore revising the report and bringing it to a future meeting of council. I have a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Turco. Resolve that the agenda and addendum for the 2018-03-05 council meeting as presented be approved.
All in favor? That's carried.
Into proclamations and delegations under agenda item 5.1, Mr. Acting Mayor, you've declared conflicts.
Yeah, I'll leave the chair and Councillor Butland if you would take care of this presentation.
Under agenda item 5.1, OLG Community Recognition Program. Darcy Romanen, Gateway's Regional Director, Northern Ontario. Jim Love, General Manager, Gateway Casino, Sault Ste. Marie. And Jake Pastor, Director of Municipal and Community Relations, OLG, are in attendance.
Welcome, Mr. Pastor.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor Butland and City Council. Well, it's been quite some time that I've been back behind this counter, behind this podium. When I was here back then, I know that Councillor Myers will attest that we were always back here asking for money for economic development initiatives. So it's so nice to be here, and the tables have turned a bit, and we're here to present some money. I want to, again, acknowledge Darcy Romanen and Jim Love, who are with Gateway Casinos and are our partners here in Sault Ste. Marie and all across Northern Ontario and the Southwest Ontario. They operate facilities for us. Also from my office is Mars Riddell, who works very closely on the Community Recognition Program, and Dave Pitcher, who's on the operations side with us on service delivery management. I'd like to recognize, of course, Mayor Provenzano and Council, and of course, Acting Mayor Steve Butland, for all the ongoing support for OLG. It's a real pleasure to be here today to celebrate what the city's doing to improve the community. And investing in infrastructure and maintenance projects is what the money. I want to talk a little bit about what the municipal contribution agreement and the community recognition program are, just to provide a quick little synopsis. We have a municipal contribution agreement with 24 communities across the province. Soon it'll be 28. It's the financial relationship we have with every municipality. As a part of that program, we have what's stated in that called the community recognition program. And once a year, in all 24 communities, we want to celebrate how municipalities are utilizing the funds that are coming from gaming activities in their own communities and how it's being utilized in the community. So in all across the province, we have some great examples of how that money is spent, but we've always used Sault Ste. Marie as a bit of an example across the province. It went to hospital infrastructure, it went to doctor recruitment, and now it's going to capital asset replacement and things like new roof for Civic Center and things like that. So we're very, very proud of the relationship that we've established here in Sault Ste. Marie over the last 30 years. Over that time, we built solid and successful partnerships in the community, obviously with the city, but also with, and I see my friend Rory Ring here for the Chamber of Commerce. We have a great relationship with the chambers all across the province, and we work very closely with them. And today we're celebrating one example of what we've been able to achieve together. OLG is building a stronger province, and we're very, very proud that we've contributed over $27 million now to the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And I think we're going to add to that a little bit with another check here today. And if you don't mind,
We don't mind at all.
I'll come down. I'll come down.
Oh, it's a big check.
It's a big check. At OLG, we only have big checks. $1.4 million.
That's not yours, Steve. That's the one.
Under agenda item 5.2, Retired Teachers of Ontario 50th Anniversary. Rich Profit, President, Retired Teachers of Ontario, District 3 Algoma, is in attendance.
Welcome, Rich.
Thank you, Acting Mayor and councillors, for recognizing the Retired Teachers of Ontario. I'm here today along with my executive for the region of Algoma, who have serviced numerous years on behalf of not only the people in Sault Ste. Marie and Algoma, but also in the province of Ontario. The Retired Teachers of Ontario, RTO, is a full-service voluntary organization that is celebrating its 50th year of anniversary. It's been alive since 1968, providing a strong voice for more than 75,000 retirees from schools and school boards, colleges and universities, childcare, and other members of the education community. Our mission as an organization can be very simply stated. We strive to be the trusted voice for the broader education community. In fact, we are seen as the voice of seniors and retirees through our robust advocacy approach locally, provincially, and nationally. We have built influential relationships with government policymakers and like-minded organizations as our voice is clear and impactful. In addition to this, we wish to improve the lives of members and seniors. This is being done as we are focused on what matters most. We are game-changing advocates for our membership, offering them more value than ever. as the retirement journey is different for each individual, we have services to offer every step of the way from pre-retirement onward. Locally, RTO is celebrating 50 years as a group dedicated to improving the lives of people in our communities. In the last few years, we have donated over $35,000 to assist children in our community in a variety of ways through 11 projects in Algoma. Annually, we provide two $500 bursaries to Algoma University and Sault College. Every year, more than 110 retired teachers perceptibly assist in the organization of the Festival of Trees. And volunteers devote countless hours to Arch, Christmas Cheer, and the hospital, which rely heavily upon the kindness of RTO members. Provincially, RTO has developed an advocacy program which highlights a number of areas of apprehension but concern to seniors. And some of these concerns are elder abuse, a widespread but mainly hidden problem, geriatric training, a necessity as over the next 2 decades, those over the age of 65 will double. We hopefully here all understand age-friendly communities and pharmacare. Canada is the only country with universal health care that does not also provide universal drug coverage. In the words of one of our members, RTO is an organization like no other. It provides so many services for so many people, effectively, professionally, caringly, and thoroughly. I ask you, Acting Mayor, and the councillors as well, what's not to love about RTO, the Retired Teachers of Ontario? And thank you, sir.
Rich, thank you for your presentation, and congratulations to you and your membership for the work you do in our community. And congratulations on your 50th anniversary. I'll read your proclamation.
Thanks, Rick.
Whereas the Retired Teachers of Ontario, RTO-ERO, whose vision statement is to be publicly recognized as the leading voice of Ontario educators, educational support staff, college and university staff in retirement, and whereas the Retired Teachers of Ontario, which has existed since 1968, is an organization committed to improving the quality of life of over 75,000 members and other seniors, believing that all seniors are valuable and contributing members of society, worthy of respect as they move forward with a healthy lifestyle in the retirement journey. And whereas the members of Algoma District 3 of the Retired Teachers of Ontario have made significant contributions as volunteers in many aspects of our community's life, now therefore I, Rick Nero, by virtue of the power vested in me as acting mayor of the city of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim March 14th, 2018 as a day to celebrate and honor the 50th anniversary of the Retired Teachers in Ontario, recognizing the strong contribution retired educators have made in our community.
Thank you, sir.
Comment, Councillor Fata? Question? Sure.
Yeah. Thank you very much, and certainly congratulations for that achievement. I'd like to bring this up. I'm probably going to get my knuckles wrapped for bringing this up at this point, but I think we're all adults in the room here. I think it's important. We obviously agreed that what goes on in terms of helping our seniors is extremely important, and what the Teachers Retirement Federation does is certainly exceptional. But I've been very vocal in the past, and I'm going to bring this up, and I'll keep it as brief as possible. But when you take this mathematical scenario, you take 50 retired teachers working for 50 days per year, times, and I'll use a figure of $200, that's $500,000 that's not ending up in the hands of our young people, the ones that are aspiring to stay here.
Councillor Fata, please, this is not the time for that conversation. Richard, I apologize. Rick? Please, that's not, this is a proclamation. to congratulate the RTO on 50-year anniversary.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
And Mr. Mayor, just in response to the previous speaker, I would suggest that that you discuss that with the government of Ontario, not the retired teachers
Thank
of
you,
Ontario.
Rich. Thank you. Not on this. Not on this subject.
That we have a retired teacher at our table, and I think it's
absolutely.
apropos to be able to acknowledge one of our own, Councillor Steve Butland. I sit beside him, so I hear that every other person that comes before us, oh, I taught him, oh, I taught her. He must be much older than what he looks, but we do respect, Steve, very much your career in teaching, and you have influenced a lot of young people in our community, and we thank you for all of you as educators.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
Mr. Acting Mayor and members of council, under agenda item 5.4, it's a proclamation that was on the addendum, International Women's Day. Rory Ring, CEO, Sault Ste. Marie Chamber of Commerce, is in attendance.
Mr. Ring.
Thank you very much, Acting Mayor and Council, for the opportunity to address you, and I learn every day from Councillor Butland. Started by suffragettes in the early 1900s, the first International Women's Day was celebrated in 1911. International Women's Day belongs to all communities everywhere, governments, companies, charities, educational institutions, networks, associations, the media, and more. Whether through a global conference, community gathering, classroom lesson, or dinner table conversation, everyone can play a purposeful part in pressing for gender parity. Collective action and shared responsibility for driving gender parity is what makes International Women's Day successful. Gloria Steinem, world-renowned feminist, journalist, and activist, once explained, "The story of women's struggle for equality belongs to no single feminist, nor to any one organization, but to the collective efforts of all who care about human rights." With the World Economic Forum 2017 Global Gender Gap Report, findings tell us that gender parity is over 200 years away. There's never been a more important time to keep motivated and press for progress, this year's theme for International Women's Day. And while we know that gender parity won't happen overnight, the good news is that across the world, women are making positive gains day by day. Plus, there's indeed a very strong and glowing global movement of advocacy, activism, and support. We can't be complacent. Now more than ever, there is a strong call to action to press forward and progress gender parity. A strong call to press for progress. A strong call to motivate and unite friends, colleagues, and communities to think, act, and be gender inclusive. International Women's Day is not country, group, or organizational specific. The day belongs to all groups, collectively everywhere. So together, let's be tenacious in accelerating gender parity. Collectively, let's press for progress and commit to a gender parity mindset via progressive action. Let's all press for progress by following 5 simple commitments: to maintain a gender parity mindset, to question any lack of women's participation, identify alternatives that are more inclusive, nominate women for opportunities, always include and support women, think 50-50 as the goal. To challenge stereotypes and bias, question assumptions about women, challenge statements that limit women, always use inclusive language, work to remove barriers to women's progress, buy from retailers who position women in positive ways. To forge positive visibility of women, identify ways to make women more visible, extend opportunities to women first, assume women want opportunities until declined, select women as a spokesperson and leaders, support visible women. To influence others' beliefs, actions, support, call out inappropriate behavior, campaign for equality in meaningful ways, lead by example via inclusive actions, be a role model for equality, actively contribute to changing the status quo. To celebrate women's achievements, believe achievement comes in many forms, value women's individual and collective success, ensure credit is given for women's contributions, celebrate women's roles and their journeys, support awards showcasing women's success. And on that last point, the local Chamber of Commerce is supporting, honoring, and developing women leaders on March 8th by presenting at our Women in Breakfast, Business Breakfast, the Athena Leadership Award. The Athena Leadership Award was inspired by the goddess of Greek mythology known for her strength, courage, wisdom, and enlightenment. Qualities embodied in the Athena leadership model. The award is unique in scope, local, national, and international, and is presented to a woman or man who is honored for professional excellence, community service, and for actively assisting women in their attainment of professional excellence and leadership. Since the program's inception in 1982, more than 7,000 exemplary leaders and over 500 communities have received the prestigious Athena Award in countries all over the world. By honoring exceptional leaders, the program seeks to inspire others to achieve excellence in their professional and personal lives. In honor of International Women's Day campaign theme, Press for Progress, we will host a panel discussion with local businesswomen who are from a variety of industries and executive level positions and past Athena Leadership Award recipients. They will share experiences, success stories, and advice to help inspire and support businesswomen in Sault Ste. Marie. Let's all press for progress.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Ring. A couple of questions before I read the proclamation. Councillor Christian, a comment?
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Acting Mayor. I'm glad that this was brought forward. Thank you very much. Obviously very apropos. I've been living in a household with 3 women for the last 24 years. And I'd like to think that they've taught me quite a bit over the years, and I've certainly grown to even more so appreciate the role that women play in our society. And as a business teacher, I'd like to think that that I do my very best to promote that concept as well in my classes. It's funny because I've seen over the last decade and a half how even the textbooks and the material that you teach has gone from a masculine to more feminine and a much more balanced approach. And I've tried to instill that in all of my students, male and female. So this is a very, very good proclamation and one that's well-deserved. And I think as a society, we've made progress. We still have a long way to go, though. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hollingsworth?
Thank you. I just have a comment as well, Acting Mayor. Thank you, Rory Ring, for coming to say those amazing, kind words. It inspires young women. It inspires all age categories. So thank you for taking your time to do that. And just speaking freely and openly, I want to recognize the women in our city, but in our country, around the world, for doing great things, for being trailblazers. And there could be aunts, grandmothers, daughters, nieces, and so forth. And each woman that you come in contact, if you sit down and just listen, they do have some amazing advice. So I think you summarized it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. First of all, I want to acknowledge Gail Manley, who's here with retired teachers, but she's also the president of Zonta, or was. Okay, well, and Zonta is a wonderful organization for business women and very active in a number of initiatives that are critically important to women. But I also wanted to take this opportunity. This is election year in the city of Sault Ste. Marie, as well as all municipalities across our province. I have the privilege and honor of having been the first woman councillor in Ward 2, and I have a ward mate who's the second woman councillor in Ward 2. So I really want to throw down the gauntlet now and encourage all the women in our community to take a look at getting actively involved in their municipal government. This is the year to do that because we have municipal elections in the fall. And I'll just take this moment to give that plug that you can be nominating anytime between May 1st and July 26th, Mr. Clerk, or 27th? May 1st to July 27th might be the nomination period.
May 1st.
May 1st is the beginning of it anyway. So we just encourage all the women in our community to get active and get your voice heard. You know that we have 3 members of council who are women, and we're all women who are very confident and capable. And I think you've seen that demonstrated around this table in the last 3.5 years. So we just challenge all women to get involved. And thank you, Mr. Ring. I know you've got a very strong woman in your family who would attest to all of those things, right? So,
as I would.
As you would. Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you. I'll read the proclamation. Whereas Thursday, March the 8th, 2018 is International Women's Day, a day to recognize women's achievements and acknowledge the challenges that they continue to face in the quest for gender equality. And whereas, according to Canadian studies and statistics, increased economic participation of women resulted in a $130 billion contribution to economic activity in 2012 alone, equivalent to approximately 7% of the gross domestic product. Further, when a woman decides to start a business, she tends to stay in business longer. In other words, women-led business survival rates are higher. Further, in terms of employee growth rates, majority female-owned firms with growth intentions are significantly more active in hiring new employees. And whereas equality between women and men is enshrined in the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, and we have made great strides in many areas, such as education and workforce participation, nevertheless, challenges remain. Too few women are advancing into leadership roles. Women are underrepresented in politics. Women in the workforce tend to earn less than men. Women continue to be responsible for the majority of caregiving. Women continue to experience high rates of gender-based violence. And whereas there has never been a more important time to keep motivated and #press for progress, and with global activism for women's equality fueled by movements like #MeToo, #TimesUp, and more, there's a strong global momentum striving for gender parity. Now therefore, I, Rick Nero, as acting mayor of Sault Ste. Marie, do hereby proclaim and recognize March the 8th, 2018 as International Women's Day in Sault Ste. Marie, and I urge all of our citizens to recognize and celebrate women's achievements and acknowledge the challenges that they continue to face in the quest for gender equality, and to challenge attitudes and behaviors that allow gender inequality to exist. #Press for Progress in 2018.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Acting Mayor, members of council, just prior to our presentation under 5.3 Stormwater Financing Study, we do want to handle one of the resolutions under Section 8.5, Mac Marcoux. We do have the resolution. Councillor Myers has also provided a short video clip for us to watch prior to the reading of the resolution, and I believe Councillor Myers would like to say a few words.
Okay, Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Yeah, I think that I hope people are pretty aware that Mac Marcoux, and I said in the resolution he's 21, he won't be 21 until June, so he's really only 20 right now, and he's already accomplished tremendously great, I guess, accomplishments he's made at the podium table in a lot of the different options that he's had in the way he's accomplished over the years. But what comes recently is 2014 Sochi. He had 3 medals, 1 gold and 2 bronze. So he's off to the Winter Paralympics that begins on March 9 in Pyeongchang. Am I saying that properly, Mr. Butland? Yes? Close enough. Okay, and we wanted to really have a message go from the mayor on behalf of our community, on behalf of City Council, to wish him well. And you'll see this interview that was done with him just a short time ago, and I think that straightforward, that says it all. We just want to wish him well. Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Good, we'll look at video.
And with the closing of the Winter Games, Paralympians will be the next athletes to hit the world stage in Pyeongchang. Among them, a skier from Sault Ste. Marie. And CTV's Lincoln Lauder reports Mac Marcoux looks to be finding his form at the right time.
Now, Mac Marcoux is inside Krakow's time. Mac Marcoux says he and his guide are skiing well heading into the 2018 Paralympic Games. The duo recently claimed the Crystal Globe for being the top team on the World Cup circuit.
Yeah, we're definitely coming in with a lot of good momentum. We're just still kind of coming in with an open mind, Korea is a whole different situation, you know, with snow and venue.
Having won a gold and 2 bronze medals representing Canada at the 2014 Sochi Games, the visually impaired skier says he hopes to use that experience to his advantage. The 20-year-old adds he plans to be a little more reflective than he was 4 years ago.
I think it's just more the atmosphere of the Paralympics. You know, there's so much more hype around it, and it's just, there's some feeling that you get when you come into the Olympic Village that, you know, all the athletes that have come together to compete in one place, it really is special.
The 2018 Games will be a family affair for the Marcoux. In addition to his girlfriend, Mac's mom, dad, and brother are all making the trip to Korea. They say it's going to be fun to watch him compete against the best in the world.
Mac's done really great things the last couple of years since Sochi. He's kept being consistent, been world champion, and we're just hoping that he does well at the Games. He's very level-headed and isn't expecting, hasn't set any goals.
The 2018 Paralympic Games begin March 9th. Lincoln Loudon, CTV News, Sault Ste. Marie.
And a motion by Councillors Myers and Hollingsworth. Whereas Sault Ste. Marie's 21-year-old Mac Marcoux is representing Canada in the Pyeongchang 2018 Paralympic Winter Games, and whereas Mac is considered the international favorite in all the para-alpine skiing events for men with a visual impairment, and whereas Mac is an accomplished Canadian Paralympic alpine skier and has won 3 titles at the IPC Alpine Skiing World Cup at the age of 15, and whereas in 2016, Alpine Canada named Mac Marcoux Male Para-Alpine Skier of the Year. And whereas Marcoux won 3 medals in alpine skiing at the 2014 Winter Paralympics in Sochi, including gold in the men's visually impaired giant slalom, bronze in the men's visually impaired downhill, and bronze in the Super G. And whereas Mac has been inducted into the Sault Ste. Marie Sports Hall of Fame and the Sault Ste. Marie Walk of Fame, now therefore be it resolved that Mayor Christian Provenzano sends a message of best wishes and support to Mac on behalf of City Council and the community for his upcoming participation in the 2018 Winter Paralympics commencing on March 9th in Pyeongchang. And further be it resolved that City Council urges Saultites to use social media to cheer Mac on to the medal platform.
Sure, that says it all. All in favor? That's carried.
Under Agenda Item 5.3, Stormwater Financing Study, Rick Telvidi, Mike Gregory, and Pippi Warburton, ACOM Canada Limited, are in attendance.
Hello, thanks for having us. I'm Pippi Warburton from ACOM, and I'm here to introduce to you your own stormwater financing study. So today I have with me Mike Gregory, and our project manager from the city, Kathleen Tado, is also with us. And Rick Telvidi is also with us, our local representative from ACOM. So the purpose of today's meeting is just to give you an introduction to the study, to reintroduce you to stormwater as a subject, and to keep it in the forefront of your mind as we move forward with the study. We're going to revisit quickly the Stormwater Management Plan from 2015 and also the Asset Management Plan, and look at the long-term stormwater management goals that the city has provided for itself. We'll introduce this financing study and describe why it's needed and what's involved. We're going to provide some information about the current stormwater program in Sault Ste. Marie and also the current funding sources. We're going to identify future needs and potential alternatives for the funding sources, describe the next steps in the study, and also seek some feedback on stormwater management and financing issues and concerns. So the Stormwater Management Master Plan, Management Plan from 2015. In that plan, the city looked at the new guidelines for stormwater management and looked at the importance of quality and quantity concerns related to new and existing development in stormwater management. This plan was adopted by council, with guidelines were adopted by council in 2015, and it looked at the long-term needs for stormwater management. In this recommendation, the final recommendations from this study, there were noted about $40 million worth of new stormwater management works were required. Also from this study is how we came to the financing study, because I think the $40 million price tag, it was also recommended that you looked at a financing study to come up with a sustainable funding source to finance all that work. The 2015 Asset Management Plan provided an estimate of the current assets and where the funding was coming from with stormwater management. So it looks at, it does estimate a funding gap between $1.5 and $6.6 million with respect to stormwater financing currently in the city. So there's somewhere between, approximately half $500 million worth of stormwater assets in the city of Sault Ste. Marie. And we're looking at a responsible mechanism to fund the reliable and responsible operations and maintenance of those assets. So we'll be going forward looking at that asset management plan and using some of the numbers from that, but also developing those numbers further with help from the city, the various departments of the city. So what is Sault Ste. Marie currently doing for stormwater management? Well, there's inspection and maintenance, like I was saying, any responsible management of these valuable assets. There's inspection and maintenance and operations that need to be carried out. There's also flood and emergency responses. So I believe in 2013, everyone is very aware that became acutely important issue in the city. Rehabilitation and capital improvements. So there's lots of capital projects outlined in the stormwater management plan. Snow ditching, of course, is very important. And then there's administration that goes along with all of those tasks. So a few quick photos to talk about, to really paint a picture tells a 1,000 words of how important stormwater management is. So things like operations and maintenance. If the debris is not collected from those inlets, they will cause flooding. If the erosion is not maintained, you'll get poor water quality. I think you'll probably be aware or familiar with some of these big capital works projects that have been constructed in the recent past, all related to stormwater. And then there's operations and maintenance, also some projects and some photos to help remind you some things that are going on in the city and other stormwater management related operations and maintenance. So the stormwater financing study overview, we're going to determine an appropriate, affordable level of service with respect to stormwater projects and activities. We're going to identify and evaluate funding options and alternatives. We'll look at the long list and then evaluate them down to a shorter list. We're going to solicit feedback from Stormwater Advisory Committee as well as from residents and business owners. We're going to recommend a preferred alternative to determine the impacts of this alternative compared to your current funding sources. And then we're going to come back and present these findings and recommendations to the council after the election in the fall. So some study highlights, the range of funding options that we're going to be investigating will include the do-nothing option. We could also look at changes to the property tax funding that you currently have. So we could increase funding, increase property taxes. No one's going to like that option. Dedicated stormwater tax levy, so we could have an earmarked amount that would be sustainable and regular and easy to plan around, that would be only for stormwater. That would be another option within the property tax funding. Or we could reprioritize the current tax revenue distribution. Another option would be to initiate new development charges. We are aware that the city has looked into development charges in recent past and has decided not to go with development charges. So with that in mind, perhaps an option we would consider would be a stormwater-only development charge. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. And then, of course, the stormwater user-funded program. That would be the last option would be considering. So this study is going to be led by, it's currently being led because we've already started, is being led by the city's internal steering committee, which is led by Catherine Pato as our project manager. Sorry, is there a question?
We'll take questions after the presentation.
Okay. The internal steering committee, which includes staff members from various departments in the city. We're also going to be advised by the Stormwater Advisory Committee. Our first meeting is tomorrow with them, which includes members of the public and the community and interested stakeholders. We'll also take direction and ultimately decisions from the council themselves. We'll be looking at a level of service. So obviously this slide is pretty self-explanatory. As we go with a higher level of service, the cost goes up. So we're going to find that affordable level of service with sustainable options. This slide shows an example of some previous studies that our consultant team has worked on throughout Ontario and Calgary, and Canada. So you can see that we have looked at the similar stormwater financing studies in many municipalities around Canada, and we're going to take some of that experience to help us make some decisions and answer some questions here. And interestingly, Thunder Bay is also currently in the same spot right now as Sault Ste. Marie is developing a feasibility study. So to quickly touch on the pros and cons of some of the options we'll be considering, property tax, of course, like I said, nobody's going to like that. However, the billing system is already known, and it can be used to fund all sorts of stormwater projects and activities in the city. The cons, it's not a dedicated or stable source of funding, so it can't be relied upon as the same amount every year necessarily. And there's annual competition for that tax amount with other programs in the community. It also doesn't provide an incentive to have best management practices with respect to stormwater management, which we'll see in the user fee option. Development and growth related funding. So it's a known type of financing study, although Sault Ste. Marie has opted not to use it. Like I said, we could look at a separate development charge only for stormwater. And it's more equitable, possibly because it's seen as something that's based on the contributing area, whereas a property tax is just based on assessed value, which isn't relate directly to the amount of stormwater runoff a property is contributing. The cons would be that it's only for developable land, so that money couldn't be used for operations and maintenance. Stormwater user fee, that's one I'll spend a little bit more time on. So it's something that we should all be accustomed to because we use it for other utilities. For example, with water, we have a meter and you're charged based on how much volume of water you use. And wastewater, similarly, you're charged by the volume you generate. And solid waste, you can weigh in at the weigh station or get charged for an extra bag of garbage. So same with stormwater. What a stormwater user fee would be, you'd be charged by the amount of runoff contribution your property has, your contribution your property makes. So the way that we would measure that is by the imperviousness, the impervious area of a property. So you can see by the slide, looking at the aerial photography, the impervious area would be the roof and the driveway and the sidewalks, and the permeable area would be the grass and the rooftops. So we would measure that, and that's the indicator that we would use to base the user fee on. So just as an information for you, from typical other studies that have been done in Ontario, the range for a user fee for stormwater goes between $4 and $15 per household per month. There's a wide variety and levels of services from these different programs in different municipalities. And there's also a variety of ways that they've funded, what proportion they've funded using user fee compared to taxes, etc. So for example, in Calgary, they have a flat fee where it's an equal charge to all utility customers, whereas in London, Aurora, Richmond Hill, they have a tiered flat fee, so maybe 3 different classes. And then there's variable fees, which are more complicated to administer, but would be seen as more equitable. Those examples would be Kitchener, Waterloo, Saskatoon, Halifax, and Guelph. So a stormwater user fee, the main pro in my mind would be that it's be seen as more equitable. So the more runoff a property generates, the more they would be charged. So that's seen as more fair and equitable with respect to paying for stormwater. It also provides a dedicated source of funding, which would be able to plan around and base your stormwater programs around. It also has a possibility of creating a credit program. So if you're a larger property that has a larger fee, you'd have a possibility of gaining a credit back. And that gives the city an opportunity to have a carrot as opposed to a stick. So when you have an existing stormwater facility on a development, currently you don't really have the ability to get onto that property and see whether that stormwater facility is well maintained. But if they wanted to get their credit, they would have to show that the stormwater facility or OS or tanks have been properly maintained. So in my mind, that's a very good advantage as well. The cons would be that it's a little more difficult to administer. So there's definitely an administration cost and also the cost of the study that we're doing currently. So next steps. So we'll be putting all this information that we're gathering and the parcel analysis. We're also almost finished delineating the percent impervious for different property types. So that's something that will be included in this study and we're currently working on. And we've developed a stormwater website to provide information to the public. There's upcoming meetings. We have our Stormwater Advisory Committee meeting tomorrow, and our first public information center is here also tomorrow, and you're all invited, and we hope to see some of you there. We'll be presenting the project findings and the study recommendations to the council after the fall municipal elections.
Thank you for that presentation. We have a number of questions, starting with Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, thank you for the presentation. And the more information we have, we will be more informed for our constituents, so thank you. You mentioned in your presentations about how residents may be evaluated to come up with a rate. Sorry, did you mention about the commercial side as well?
Yes, so both commercial, industrial properties and residential properties will all be measured. We tend to look at residential or different types of property types, and we use the impact data to delineate different types of properties. So to give us the classes of properties, yeah.
Okay, so the commercial side, you'd be looking at sidewalks again, and...
Absolutely, so anything that's impervious, so those parking areas, rooftops, those are all impervious areas. So typically a lot of industrial areas would be like very high impervious areas, yeah.
Okay. And you talk about charging a fee. May I miss this? When, if this does happen, when do you think the fee will be charged?
I think if it was accepted, if the fee was accepted by the end of the year, it could be reinstated by the following year, I would think. I mean, it sometimes doesn't move that fast in Guelph, whereas it accepted and then was instigated the following year. Yeah, so quite quickly.
Okay. And just for clarification, another question. It's my understanding that the province is developing a low-impact development stormwater management guidance manuals. Mm-hmm. And it's my understanding that the province will be, which may have budgetary impact on the city stormwater management program. Is that correct?
Yes, that would have, yeah, definitely would have an impact on the stormwater management program, yeah.
Okay. And one last question with regards to tax-exempt properties. So again, I'm assuming that's like churches as an example?
Yeah, I think churches and schools, hospitals, other examples. I'm not exactly sure of all of them. But there are tax-exempt properties that currently aren't contributing anything to stormwater, but they wouldn't necessarily be exempt from a user fee, the same way that they pay, water or hydro. But that's also something that we need to, through the process of consultation with the community and staff, that we would discuss specifically those issues, yeah, and engage those property owners specifically.
Okay, and so are we one of the last communities to start looking at this and start?
I wouldn't say the last, but not the first. Okay. Yeah, so there's been many before you, but there's still many to come, I think. Right? Yeah. Okay. For instance, I don't think Sudbury has one yet, but I think they're looking at one, so you beat Sudbury.
Okay, so it sounds like it's almost mandatory coming down for the province.
It's not mandatory, but there has been talk about that, but it's only talk so far. But I think that it's seen as a wise step in order to finance and manage assets that are valuable and tend to get overlooked. So I think it's yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm. Thank you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. My questions are, I think, should be directed towards Ms. Tatto to the accompanying report, if I could. Thank you. Okay, let me. Thank you, Ms. Tatto. I'm looking at this report. Page 1, it said that the asset management plan completed in 2015 identified a funding deficit for infrastructure. Do we know exactly how much that is in dollars?
I don't have those numbers in front of me. I'm not sure if Dawn, if you have any information in relation to the deficit.
Even a rough idea in terms of.
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I don't have the numbers with me either, but in the presentation there was a gap identified of anywhere from, I think it was $2.5 to $6 million a year in the 5-year capital works or 5-year asset management plan.
So 30 million?
Yeah, in that range, 20 to 30 million, and that's just for capital. The other aspect of this is operations.
And my second question would be, How are we funding for operations? Are we funded sufficiently for operations?
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I would pass that question over to the treasurer. I know both operations costs for operations come from both the urban-only levy, which is for storm sewers, and also some of it comes from the general levy itself. But I believe it's Public Works would say it's underfunded. There's lots that we need to do to these facilities that we just don't have the money to do.
But you're talking about operations, not capital improvements.
Correct.
So we're either funded for are we funded for our operations, I guess is the question.
Michelle?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian. Our operations are funded to a certain degree, but I know in the past there has been requests for additional funding in order, I think our ditching program potentially is one that we're missing funds on. There's a lot of other things that are also included in that. As for the capital, it's mostly just roads that we're covering off in the capital. There's a whole stormwater management plan that was presented to council a couple of years ago, and I think, Catherine, it was in the range of $40 million. That's not in the capital budget as funded at this point.
Yeah, the $40 million was proposed works in the master plan that wasn't included in the asset management plan. So some of the works in that plan were mandatory things that we were looking at. But as part of this study, we're also looking at levels of service. So for example, right now through operations, if we're only able to get to 50% of the catch basins to clean them out a year, what would it cost to get 100% of them done in a certain time frame? And so stormwater management ponds is another one where we don't spend a lot of money cleaning them out because we don't have it. So there's a whole range of capital and management things that we have to look at.
Good. Well, thank you very much, because that's actually was going to be sort of the line of question that I had next, and you've answered that there's a range of options or possibilities, which is important. You mentioned, Councillor Hollingsworth touched on the management guidance manual and how it may, and the answer was that it likely will impact our budgetary considerations. I guess to frame the question in a different way, whatever comes out of that manual will be mandatory. Is that fair?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, we don't have the final document yet, so it's hard to say what will be mandatory and what won't. Some of the discussion points are, low impact development, even for repaving, and that may or may be off the table. So until that comes into force, I'm not sure, but there are other things that will be mandatory potentially. One is the regulations in relation to asset management and accounting for what we have to spend and where we're going to get the money. And if we don't have the money, a risk management plan potentially will be required to discuss the risks in not spending that money. And also, in relation to the International Joint Commission, I sit with the BPAC Council to represent the city, and one of the delisting criteria is contingent upon commencing implementation of the stormwater management plan recommendations. We've started, but we don't have enough money to go through all of the recommendations. So there's funding as well for the quality of stormwater component in order to enact those changes.
You must be reading my notes because you're answering all of my questions before I get to ask them, because my next question had to do with risk assessment discussion, so I'll just stroke that off the list. I guess my final point is something that you touched on, and that is that the point, I think it's the fourth point, that the Canada-U.S. Great Lakes Water Quality Agreement recognizes this area as an area of concern. Given the fact that we're on the water, it's federal, how much skin does the federal government have in this game? Are they willing to, given the challenges that we have, willing to assist with mitigating any problems that if we don't address will impact the river and the quality of water in the region? Perhaps you can't answer that question yet. It's almost a statement I'm making. It seems like that given the uphill challenge we have here, that the federal government at least should be providing some support. I mean, it's not like we're landlocked. Like, this is going to impact water quality in the Great Lakes. So what do we advocate? Does this process form part of a strategy that we use with the federal government to seek funding to help us solve our problems?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Christian, the asset management plans, I believe, will be used as a tool moving forward. I think right now even there's been some effort in putting those together, so we have them in place for funding applications. And in addition to that, Environment Canada and the Ministry of Environment and Climate Change are involved in the BPAC meetings, and we have received funding for various projects. One example would be the inflow and infiltration study that we did, albeit that cost was about $130,000 total, so each level of government contributed to that. They do have programs. One is the Great Lakes Sustainability Fund that cities who are working with an AOC can access. However, when we look at the entire asset management plan, we're talking millions of dollars, so some of the funding programs all are the smaller dollar amounts. And for the assets we're looking at, we also have to take into account how we're going to manage our own finances.
I appreciate your responses to those questions. I just recognize that it's a challenge for our community, and I just hope that we don't operate in isolation and that we get as much support as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Shoemaker.
I really only have comments here, Mr.
We'll get the questions first. Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. And I guess my question to the presenter, you spoke about the tiered, variable, and the flat. What would you recommend?
I think a combination for them of them is good. So for the too much tiering in the residential with the smaller properties, it's very administratively heavy, expensive to administer. So some combination, I think, of them, and it has to be tailored fit to the city. So I think what we've seen in other municipalities is that some combination of them. So a tiered approach a flat approach is not as seen as fair and equitable. So some tiering has got to be there to make it seem more fair and equitable, but not too much tiering, because then that becomes too unmanageable and too much administration.
So in this report, you're stating that the typical range in Ontario is between $4 to $15 per month per household, correct?
That's right.
And that's with tiered or variable or flat?
Yes, and it's also different. They have different levels of service. So some of those communities might have had large capital projects or larger budgets, or just be larger cities, for example, that needed to have, or that had been neglected for long periods of time, for example. So there was lots of variance in those. And also some of them chose to have only part of their stormwater funded by the user fee, and part of it still is funded by the property tax, for example. So they might have a blended funding mechanism. So they're not exactly comparing apples to apples, exactly.
Yeah. In your study highlights, you stated initiative new development charges for new development. Well, this council has voted that down. I don't know why it would be in here if we've already voted it down.
Absolutely. So we noted that. I think just as a way of comparing different alternatives and keeping all of the tools in the toolbox available to us in the study, we might possibly consider, and we might not consider, if this is where we're directed to not consider this by our representatives from the city, but we could possibly consider a development charge for storm only. So that would be slightly different than the development charge that you have already voted down. But we are aware that has been voted down and been looked at previously. So that will be considered, and we will consult with our team on that.
As I sit here and I'm reading your report and the options for funding, as a councillor, I would really hesitate. I mean, increased property taxes. Well, right off the bat, I would say no. Dedicated stormwater tax levy, again, I would be on the more of a no side. Pre-prioritized tax revenue distribution. I don't know exactly what that is, but possibility. I just find some of the funding options is basically it's coming back to the taxpayer, and they're going to be taking the burden of this. And personally, I don't think it's the fairest way. And maybe, as Councillor Christian said, regarding provincial or federal funding for this.
So I think, Council, this is all going to come back to us from staff on what funding sources we should be looking at. That's the next phase that they're going to be looking at. So
well, I'm just making comment on the report, Mr. Active.
Any other questions, Mr.
No,
Councillor?
that's it.
Councillor Myers?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I was sitting here thinking the aspect of, first of all, there's two sides to this. There's the side that we need to incur as part of our asset management and so on going forward on the capital side. And then there's the user side. So obviously the end user, being our residents, are certainly going to have to be participants in this. I have very good friends down on Richmond Hill, and I mean, I've mentioned this to them when I saw it on our agenda, and they really see it as a non-issue. It's not a big amount of money, but the incentive is there then in terms of managing your stormwater. And I guess where I'm going to be interested going forward, and I can ask the staff tonight, but I don't really want to put them on the spot. For example, in Ward 2, and in our city, but I've seen it very clearly in Ward 2, we have geography to take into consideration because we're on a hill. And then we run into a river. And in Ward 2, all of our public works, and our Director of Public Works is looking at me, she knows where I'm going to go here. We have a street called Ontario Avenue, which becomes a basin, a catch basin for stormwater. It doesn't matter how much stormwater management we do, we've still got nature involved here in this thing called gravity. So what happens is the people that are at the bottom of the hill, they get a lot of runoff from up above, no matter how well the city tries to manage it, how many storm drains we have or anything else, and we are doing some management of that, as you can see by some of the work that's going on our hill right now. But how do you make it fair and equitable for residential properties with a formula when in fact geography comes into play hugely in a city like ours? It's not like we're dealing with Saskatchewan here, so I would like to hear your comment on that because I find that intriguing.
If I may answer that through you, Mr. Acting Mayor. So the basis for charge is impervious area. And like was mentioned earlier, the imperviousness at a residential property is the same impervious measured at a non-residential property. So it's charged in the same way. Now, to address the bottom of the hill people that have the disadvantage of topography and gravity, the capital projects that have been defined in the 2015 stormwater management, they would probably be meant to address those probably with a higher priority. And so the money is generated, the revenue is generated based on impervious area, everyone charged the same. But the priority of capital projects then would identify where that money needs to go first, second, third type thing. So that's how it would be addressed.
Okay, if I could, just one more, and I guess again, I look at our staff, and I guess that we're going to need to be quite creative on how we come up with and I think that you have some flexibility within what formula we can almost do a bit of a made in Sault Ste. Marie formula if we want, right? I'm getting nodding heads there. So we may look at areas of our city that are vulnerable, that maybe have some longer term projects that would change their stormwater situation that's inherited, if you like. And I just wanted to know under the legislation if you could see that we would have that, but I did see a nodding head. So we would have that kind of flexibility to take a look at our city with its unique characteristics.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's all sorts of flexibility in the funding mechanisms, but keep in mind this is a stormwater financing study, so we're not actually looking at developing what projects need to be done. That's already been done and will continue to be done. This project is looking at how to finance the things only. So just
No, I get that, but when part of it is going to be the homeowner, as was said by other councillors, we also want to bear in mind what options they have for managing stormwater. And if someone said, I'm getting my neighbor's stormwater from up above and I can't do anything to manage it, I just don't want to see us penalizing them. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. Council, before we go to comments, Mr. White's going to read the motion.
Council, this was originally on your agenda with an information resolution. Councillors Shoemaker and Bruni have proposed a resolution that would have an operative element to it, so I'll read that out at this time. Motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Bruni, resolve that the report of the Land Development and Environmental Engineer dated 2018-0305 concerning stormwater financing study be received, and that staff be directed to continue to explore all possible ways to finance the city's stormwater management plan, save and except for development charges.
Okay, Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. As Councillor Bruni and I think Councillor Myers were touching on in their comments, we've already considered development charges, whether it's development charges on all new development or development charges just on stormwater development, whatever the case might be. Council rejected development charges, and I think that we, frankly, I'm surprised that it's even in the presentation, but I think we should send a message again that we do not want development charges, whether they're narrow in scope, wide in scope, or anywhere in between. And I'm hoping that that's what this resolution gets. I'm hoping that's the message that gets across with this resolution.
Does Council have any questions on that? Do we all understand where Councillor Shoemaker and Councillor Bruni are going with the resolution? The report says to look at all funding options and alternatives. The resolution, the amending resolution says don't look at development charges, look at everything else. Go ahead, Councillor Myers.
But in clarification, I believe our presenter mentioned we're not talking about the same DC that we've already turned down. They're talking about a revised format of a DC. So I just think it's a little premature for us to say, well, we absolutely won't do this, we won't do that. What's the harm in getting the information back? I agree with what Councillor Shoemaker said, but I don't want to limit this in any way whatsoever. And I think there was a recommendation to look at some portion of a DC.
Yeah, Councillor Shoemaker's called for a recorded vote, and that's where we'll go with this. And if you're not in favor of development charges, then you should vote against it. And
so it's any portion thereof. It's not the development charges we've already dealt with in the past. It's any form of? Okay.
His are all encompassing.
Okay.
Clarification number 2, yeah.
I'm sorry?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Acting Mayor. Well, it's been stated in this report, it's after the election, so the new council, whoever they may be, may have some different ideas, be it development charges or whatever.
And I guess when the report comes back after the new council is here, they can send it back and say, you know what, we want you to look at development charges.
True.
So for now, we have a resolution. I think we understand what the amending resolution is saying, and we're ready for a recorded vote.
Recorded vote has been requested. Councillor Turco?
Against.
Councillor Fata?
For.
Councillor Christian?
For.
Councillor Krampadich?
For.
Councillor Hupinen?
For.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
For.
Councillor Shoemaker?
Councillor Grandinetti.
Sorry, I've got an old form in front of me. Councillor Grandinetti?
For.
Councillor Shoemaker?
For.
Councillor Bruni?
For.
Councillor Myers?
Against.
Councillor Butland?
Against.
Acting Mayor Nero?
For.
Motion passes.
I think we better move to planning. I'm sorry? Okay, there's an open house. It's in the, Ms. Tato, can you come up and give us the details of the open house again for the viewing public?
We have a public information center tomorrow from 4 to 7 p.m. in the Russ Ramsey room with a presentation at 5:30. And there'll be panels set up so people can wander through and ask questions to either staff or the consulting team. And if they're able to be present for the formal presentation, that will be at 5:30.
Great. Open to the public, correct?
Correct, yeah. We want public members, businesses, anybody that would be interested in learning more to come out.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Mr. Acting Mayor and members of council, we can now move to the planning portion of the meeting. Under 7.7.1, an application concerning 418 4th Line West, postponement number 2, and a motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Turco. Resolved that the report of the senior planner concerning rezoning official plan amendment application A1117Z-OP and draft plan of condominium application 57T17502 be received and that this application be postponed indefinitely. Mr. Tanazo is present to speak to the application.
Mr. Tanazo.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. The subject property is Crimson Ridge Golf Course. Council originally heard this application back in December and deferred it to March 19th. Since then, the applicant has requested an indefinite deferral to address a number of issues that have arisen. Again, the original application was to facilitate the construction of 48 new townhouse units by way of a condominium on the driving range of the golf course, and the recommendation is to approve the postponement. Thank you.
Okay, any questions on that? It's postponement. All in favor? That's carried.
Under agenda item 7.7.2, 145 McNabb Street, Infrastructure, Ontario. A motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Turco. Resolved that the report of the senior planner concerning rezoning application A1418Z be received, and that Council approve the application of a holding provision to the subject property pursuant to Section 36 of the Planning Act. No site grading, excavation, or building demolition may occur upon the subject property without further archaeological assessment prepared by a qualified archaeologist, which either identifies the burial sites or determines that the area is clear of archaeological concern, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect the approval.
Mr. Tanazo, a little brief overview on that one.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. The subject property is the jail site. And there were two hangings, one in 1948, one in 1958, and in both cases, those bodies can't be accounted for. So it's suggested that the bodies may be buried somewhere on the property. The owner, Infrastructure Ontario, has conducted 3 separate assessments, and they can't seem to locate the bodies. It's suggested that if they exist, they're in the northwest portion of the site, either under the parking lot or under the addition, which was constructed in 1985 as a slab-on grade without a basement. So essentially, the applicant is proposing this holding provision, which would allow the building to be reused and repurposed, so long as there's no groundbreaking activities that might impact any burials that exist on the site. And the recommendation is to approve the holding provision, and Michael Coakley from Infrastructure Ontario is present to address this application. Thank you.
Okay. Council, any questions? Councillor Christian.
Perhaps sir, are you prepared to speak on this or just field questions? Because I have a question about how you go about determining whether there's remains if there's already building or parking lot in the way.
Sir, could you introduce yourself again,
Sure.
please, for the record?
I'm Michael Coakley. I'm in the development planning section at Infrastructure Ontario, and I'm assisting our sales group at Infrastructure Ontario towards the disposition of this property. So in terms of your question, I guess the only real way to know is, in fact, demolishing a structure to find out what's underneath. And I guess where we're at with this property right now is we're doing our due diligence heading towards disposition. So we're undertaking various due diligence activities. And one of these activities obviously is archaeological work. So we've done the stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 work. So we had the archaeologists investigate what they thought was the 2 most likeliest areas for bodies being buried on site. And our viewpoint is that, without digging up the entire property or demolishing buildings, this represents the most practical way of ensuring that the proper archaeological studies are done. Because we don't know what's going to happen with this property in future. the existing building could be reused, or it may be demolished. We don't know, so.
I guess I'm a little confused because the way I read this was nothing can be done until they determine whether there are bodies buried under that section of the old jail.
Mr.
And
Tenazo?
how do you determine whether there's bodies buried there if you don't dig up the place? Do you use sonar? Do you use some other kind of detection device, or how do you do that? And can you repurpose the building, demolish the existing building, but not touch that one area in question, and still go ahead with demolition? I'm a little confused on what's being asked.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor. So the way that the holding provision is structured, it really tries to balance the ability to repurpose the building while at the same time the ultimate goal is to identify, protect, and ultimately preserve any burials that may be on site. So essentially it's structured that the building could be reused, there could be a change of use, there could even be renovations within the building. A new tenant could go in, as long as you're not breaking ground. So as long as there's no excavation, site grading, or demolition, really there's no impact to the potential burials. If somebody wishes to break ground and do grading or excavation, things of that nature, they would have to then satisfy council that they've exhausted all avenues of looking. Either they found records and identified where the bodies are if they're not on the site, or they have to go in and do the review. Now, a licensed archaeologist may decide down the road, and I don't want to presuppose, but a licensed archaeologist might say, okay, you're looking at digging a hole here in the northwest corner, not underneath the 1985 edition, so we're going to review that specific area before you go and break ground. So there's a number of very site-specific, development-specific things that the holding provision can cover.
So just one final question. So if we allow this provision, the future owners, et cetera, must adhere to this archaeological requirement and not put the city of Sault Ste. Marie in any position of liability once we pass this provision.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, a holding provision, it's Section 36 of the Planning Act, so it is enshrined in the Act. It's no different than passing a zoning bylaw. It's
okay
on the property. You're bound by the Act at that point.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Councilor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I don't know really who to direct this question to, but I did receive a phone call from an elderly resident who recalls these incidents and is completely of sound mind himself, and quite well knows that the bodies are not buried anywhere on site. Now, trying to verify this in an acceptable means is kind of where I wanted to go here. I can certainly provide the gentleman's name and phone number to our planning department. Did you get a phone call from anyone? No.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor,
Okay.
no, I did
All
not.
So I can do that. And I wondered, I mean, when you try to go back in time and think about the era, I would think that the Sault Star of the day in their archives would have some information about it, because my understanding, in accordance with what this gentleman told me, is I'm quite certain it would have been reported on. And he is 100% of the belief that there are no bodies buried there. So without going into any more detail about that, would it be appropriate, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to our planning director, to provide that name and number to talk to this gentleman for anything verifiable, or is that not really valid? It's considered anecdotal.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, certainly willing to have the conversation with the individual. Again, I certainly defer to the licensed archaeologists on this, and I know that they did a great deal of research and they spoke with folks, I believe when they first started looking into this, it was about 20 years ago, and they actually spoke with a jail guard that may have been present or may have been working at the facility at the time of these hangings, but certainly happy to chat with the individual and maybe put them in touch with either Infrastructure Ontario or the licensed archaeologist.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Butler. I'm sorry, Councilor Kropotich first.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Nero. I guess my question goes to Mr. Tenazo. And just so I'm clear, so at our old jail site, right, there was two hangings. There was one in 1948 and one in 1958, correct?
That is correct.
And both of the bodies are not accounted for. Nobody knows where they are. So I just want to know at that time in them years, who actually was accountable for the bodies? Was it the jail itself, the jail admin? Was it the family, or was it the city?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, I don't know if I can provide the right answer for you. I know I've heard anecdotally from one of the archaeologists that worked on the site was throughout the whole province there was hangings, and if nobody showed up to claim the body, they would bury it at the jail. But I'm not sure under what authority who would actually be responsible for those bodies. Unfortunately, I don't have that answer.
Could we get that answer? I mean, really, we got, we should be exhausting every opportunity we have to locate the bodies. Absolutely agree with that. But to find out who was accountable for it at that time, really, I mean, there's a history here, and somebody must have been notified, okay, on where exactly they were buried. Somebody at the time must have that information. So I think it's critical that we find that information and find out who's accountable as well.
I don't know, maybe Mr. White, I think that would be a separate motion that has nothing to do with planning, asking for the holding provision on this property. But if that's what council wants to hear from staff, then I believe we would need a motion to that effect.
I'll move the motion.
Okay, we'll finish this one first. Create a motion, Councillor Kramparich, and then we'll put, well, we're going to Councillor Butland on this rezoning or holding provision.
Well, the sensitivity is obvious here. You almost hesitate to go there. But surely, Councillor Myers brought up the Sault Ste. Must have covered this, but those responsible at that time, surely the people who conducted the hanging, there must have been records kept at that time. Governments are famous for keeping records, so there is none obvious?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, at this point in time, the bodies are unaccounted for, so there's no record that they were buried elsewhere.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on the holding provision that is being asked for? The other issue I think we'll deal with when the motion comes forward. Councillor Fata, is it on the holding provision?
Yeah, I'm just curious about one thing. There's been activity, our development activity on this property dating back to 1985. Have the conditions changed that now we are being more accurate or precise on what you can or cannot do with this property? Because my concern is that if you put this provision on there, it makes the attraction of this property less, that anybody would want to get into it and get into this whole mess that this will create. So my concern is, why are we now so diligent, and in 1985 it doesn't seem like that was the case.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, certainly laws have changed, and yes, we are far more diligent today than we were back in the 80s. And I will also say there has been a great deal of not only development on the site, but a great deal of fill that has been put into the rear portion of the property. So yes, there has been a great deal of development, and we certainly are more diligent now, and the provincial policy statement is such that we have to be consistent with it. So really, the options are essentially a holding provision or for Infrastructure Ontario to essentially keep looking.
Go ahead, Councillor.
I'm just not sure if we're talking about the same property, but the property facing Bruce Street, we dealt with it a couple of years ago, where we approved for the zoning for duplex or semis. That's not part of this property, correct?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, that's Melrose Avenue. That is a separate piece of property.
Okay. Any other questions? Any comments? We ready to vote? All in favor? That's carried.
Mr. Acting Mayor, members of council, Just to finish off on this item, Councillor Krampadich, I'm not sure if you've penned the motion. This motion being moved by Councillor Krampadich. I'll read it and then it can be determined if there's a seconder to the motion. Resolve that staff investigate to determine who was accountable to record the history and burial of the inmates buried in 1948 and 1958.
So before we even ask questions or comments, is there a seconder for that? Councillor Butland.
I'm just doing this on the fly a bit. It'd be resolved that staff investigate to determine who was accountable to record the history and burial of the inmates buried in 1948 and 1958, perhaps I would say at 145 McNabb Street.
Okay, so we have a seconder. Councillor Butland is seconded. I just want to ask Mr. Tenazzo, is this something that our staff can do?
Mr. Acting Mayor, I think we can research that, yes.
Okay. Questions on the resolution? Or let's do a comment. Who's the mover? Councillor Krampadich.
Well, I think it's critical that we support this resolution going forward because we never want to see it happen again, okay? So let's find out the information, we'll look at the history, see what happened, and see if we can correct anything going forward. The history of these individuals, it has to be documented and recorded somewhere.
Okay. Are we questions or comments? You have a question, Councillor?
I have a question.
Okay, Councillor. Councillor Christian, question?
I guess my question is, since the executions were performed by provincial body, do we have where's our jurisdiction on this? It was the provincial government that runs provincial jails, and the provincial personnel perform these executions. They handle the disposition of the bodies. I'm just not quite sure where our jurisdiction lies on this.
Ms. Kenny, can you comment on that?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I can't say anything further than what you just said. Exactly, it would fall under provincial jurisdiction. I mean, we can do some research to ascertain that, but I don't think I need to do any research to tell you that jails fell and fall under provincial jurisdiction. It would have been, that's where it would be. So, and then the second question is, despite who had jurisdiction and despite what the law said, who in fact committed the executions, if that's what it was, if that are the only remains that we're looking for, as opposed to someone that might have died of natural causes, and how were those bodies dealt with, that's completely a provincial question. So I can come back to you in 2 weeks, but I'm going to say the same thing.
Councillor Myers.
Thank you. I really think that if I can give our planning department this individual to speak with, it will clarify quite a bit. I will say a little bit more in that, and he was present. He was in school and part of what was going on. Anyway, point being, the family claimed one body. Okay, the one body is not at the site. It was claimed by the family, and there was a service. I don't know that he attended the service. I don't know that part. The other was disposed of in a fashion that is not buried on the grounds. So I really think that we're taking a lot of time on something that if our planning staff could just talk to this gentleman and determine some timelines, it might find the research in the archives of the Sault Star. I'll be shocked if it's not there. And our library, as we know, do absolutely incredible research on all kinds of things that go on. And I believe this is very recent history. This is in our lifetime. Part of it was in mine, part of it was in his. So this will be there. And I would really encourage, before we go down the road on this resolution, that we allow the planning staff just to try to do a little bit more research here.
Okay, a couple more questions. Councillor Hollingsworth, then Councillor Butland.
Thank you. Councillor Myers basically asked the question, so I'll pull back, but just one thought. back then was there a practice of cremating people. That's all I'm going to say.
All right. Councillor Butler.
Yeah, with apologies, the argument that was just presented just adds credibility to the resolution. And it's irrelevant to whose jurisdiction this is. We want an answer. It's simple as that.
Okay.
2 bodies went missing. If this is a reliable source that we know the whereabouts or what happened to the one body, let's just proceed. Thank you.
Okay, Council, let's go to the vote then. Recorded vote is called for.
Recorded vote has been requested. Councillor Buttman. For. Councillor Myers.
Against.
Councillor Bruni.
For.
Against.
Councillor Shoemaker. Councillor Grandinetti.
Against.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Against.
Councillor Hoopinen.
Against.
Councillor Krompotich.
For.
Councillor Christian.
Against.
Councillor Fata.
Against.
Councillor Turco.
For.
Acting Mayor Nero.
Against.
Hence the motion fails. Our next agenda item, Council 7.7.3, 531 and 535 Trunk Road, your neighborhood credit union. Report of the senior planner is attached for the consideration of council, and the motion by Councillors Hoopinen and Turco. Resolved that the report of the senior planner concerning rezoning application A518Z be received, and that council rezone the southern 33 meters of the subject properties from general commercial C4 zone to medium density residential zone R4.S 144 with special exception 144, and further that council amend special exception 144 by adding the following provision. 1, that the subject property may be developed with semi-detached, multiple attached, and apartment dwellings or any combination thereof, and that the legal department be directed to prepare the necessary bylaw to effect this approval.
Mr. Tenazzo.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. The subject properties are the rear portions of your neighborhood credit union on Trunk Road, as well as the vacant parcel which abuts to the west. The rezoning is essentially to expand the mixed residential neighborhood to the south, and it is the applicant's intent to take these properties and, if successful with the rezoning, sever them away from the Trunk Road parcels and attach them to the development to the south. It is planning's recommendation that the application be approved, and Ralph Cuglietta is here should council have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Cuglietta, anything to add to that? Not really here to answer questions then. Anybody has any, I can answer some? Questions? Councillor Christian.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I guess my question is to Mr. Tenazzo. A couple of questions. One, I had a hard time, the drawings were difficult for me to see, but so I'm not blaming anyone, it was just difficult for me to see. Just want to be clear. The properties that we're talking about, those are the ones that, the current properties that exist there, those are the ones that are adjacent to Silver Birch, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And I know at one point there was an access point at the end of that road that caused some problems with residents on Silver Birch. My question is this, does this new addition have any impact on that entry point? Does that impact, will this impact the people on Silver Birch at all?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, no. The access, I believe it was back in 2014, there was a committee of adjustment application, and access, at that time the neighborhood was concerned that with access from the stub end of Silver Birch, that access remains gated and closed, only available for emergency vehicles. Right. So the current development as well as the proposed addition too would be to the accesses to the east and the private roadway that currently serves the Moose and an apartment building in the back. Yep. So no impact, no access to Silver Birch.
Thank you. I mean, we welcome development. I know that access point on Silver Birch was a real bone of contention, real inconvenience. So I'm happy to hear that that's not going to impact the people on that street. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hollingsworth, you had a question?
My question was answered, a clarified location. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, staff or Mr. Cuglietta? Thanks. Thank you, Mr. Cuglietta. Is anybody here to speak in opposition to this application? It appears not. Council, any comments? You ready to vote then? All in favor? That's carried.
Mr. Acting Member, I apologize, Mr. Acting Mayor and members of council. I have that on the brain tonight. We can now proceed to the consent portion of the agenda. We have dealt with the stormwater item 6.9 already.
Consent, Councilor Turco? You're up.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Can't let this go by without asking some questions about 6.6, Albert and Gore. I know Councilor Butler likes that subject. I don't know who I'm supposed to ask about the report that says here, Carl Rumio. Carl, is that your area? About the
Tonight it is.
It's been on the radar, as you know, Carl, and everybody else, for at least, I say 16 months, a year and a half since those lights at those two corners, and it's well documented. I'm not going to go into it, but I'm just going to ask a question about this report. So it goes from the resolution that we have there, that we brought up last meeting, to ask staff to come back and see how we can rectify this problem, including the reinstallation of the traffic lights at these two intersections. So I don't see that here in this report, any recommendation, other than spending more money. So, and it's sort of enclosed in other lights around the city, other monies. So can you maybe address that, Carl? Why is this Gore Street and Albert situation, which has been documented, it's still a big concern as far as collisions at those two corners. So we're lumping this into everything else in the downtown area?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councilor Turco, I think at this time our recommendation is to continue to monitor the intersections, essentially, with increased added police enforcement, which is a lot of which has happened in the month of February, as has been also addressed in the media and in the report. And as well, to not ignore the safety issues, to do a detailed safety review of the intersection with a licensed professional engineer who specializes in traffic safety. Come back with, if any, additional recommendations.
Do we have a timeline through you, Mr. Acting Mayor? Do we have a timeline as to, if nothing changes in the next 16 months, are we going to do something then at those two intersections? Other than put more stop signs. Somebody sent me an email about flashing lights, things like that, stop signs, stop lights, caution.
Through the Acting Mayor to Councilor Turco, I guess it's our recommendation that it's our belief that collisions will decline, and the added addition of the safety review of the intersection. Something may jump out at that professional who about those intersections. He may make some recommendations we certainly would take back to you sooner than in the next 16 months. I think the report says that they would be able to conduct that review in May when weather's a little better.
Well,
so not necessarily 16 months.
You're more optimistic than I am because it hasn't changed in 16 months. So what's going to change in the next? We've done everything. We've addressed the situation here through you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Actually, we had addressed that there is a problem there by doing all these things. Now spending more money. So thank you very much. That's it.
On the same subject, Councillor Grandinetti.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Through you to whoever could answer this question. Do we know how many accidents there have been at that intersection since we took the parking out on the southwest side of Gore? Does anyone know if the accidents have declined, if there's been any? No one could add. Okay, I don't, I sent an email out a while ago about police presence at that intersection. I don't agree with doing that. I know there are some people that blow the stop sign, but I think it's just a entrapment, I says, and that's not gonna solve the issue of that intersection by putting police there and handing out 41 tickets since.
I guess just on that, Councillor Turco and I attended an information media event with police services last Thursday, Councillor? Last Thursday, I think it was. And police have not only picked that intersection, they're picking intersections that have high traffic collisions. And they're not just picking that one. That one certainly fell in there because of the number of collisions, but I think you've read in the media, we heard firsthand from police that there were, I think, 41 charges at that intersection in something like a week. And there were comments that they thought the light was green when they went through, and it didn't stop at all. So clearly, you know, people are not being attentive to the signals at that intersection, or probably some other intersections as well. To make comments like there was not a stop sign there when we were standing in front of two huge stop signs.
Oh, no, I do agree, but
to have a comment come back that, I'm sorry, I thought I went through because the light was green. So I have a problem saying police should not be there when I hear those kinds of things.
It's just with this spending the $6,500 on this study, we know what the report's going to come back to.
I think
nothing's going to change.
Personally, my opinion on that is I think that staff have been asked to continue to monitor it. I think Public Works and Traffic has gone through the process to put starbursts there, we put bigger stop signs, we painted the road, and this is just an added feature that staff is recommending that we do because the traffic study is being done anyways in the downtown core, that we might as well add for $6,500, is it? Add that intersection. I don't see a problem. I would agree with staff that that's what we should do, just to make sure that someone else, independent of Public Works, takes a look at it.
Shouldn't have this study been done before the construction of Gore Street? Rather than do it and
the study, my understanding was that our staff did a warrant study on that intersection after the construction or during the construction, or not during because it wouldn't be valid, I don't think, but before, whenever they did it, whenever they felt it was feasible to do it. And it came back that that intersection did not warrant lights. So council approved the removal of the lights. We ended up with a spike in collisions, which staff tells us is normal after we remove lights, happened at other intersections. So staff took some other steps to increase the visibility of the intersection as being a stop sign intersection. And to me, again, this is just an added thing that staff wants to look at because it makes sense because we're doing the study anyways.
I would sooner spend that $6,500 to possibly look at putting the flashing red lights, solar flashing red lights or something, rather than look at a study because we know the study's going to come back negative.
Well,
that's
certainly I accept your opinion, and I gave you my opinion.
Well, no, that's all I have to say.
On the same subject, I have Councillor Fatt, same subject.
Yes, please. Yeah, I was going to ask you about this same matter of the $6,500. I think we're looking for a reason to spend $6,500. Before I ask to pull it, I'm going to ask Carl what he thinks, in his professional opinion, that this $6,500 will accomplish.
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Fata, the traffic professional will look at the geometry of the intersection, which we've done as well. He'll look at proximity of other intersections, other traffic control in the downtown. He'll make an expert opinion on those intersections, and if there's anything that jumps out at him, out of the ordinary that we haven't already seen, he'll make those recommendations for added safety to the intersection. It may say, we're doing the right thing, you're right. That's a possibility. It may say, don't do anything different.
Just a brief comment about that intersection in regards to policing. And I do think that they're there because of the way the road angles and the way you have to step forward a bit more than most 90-degree intersections to see traffic, make sure that you see it coming. That could pose a problem, and I think policing has been on that, and I believe that the comment was made that people were being charged for not coming to a complete stop. And when they ease in a little bit further up in order to have a good visual, which now they do have because of the removal of some of those parking spots. The visual should be a lot better, I'm sure. But I think as far as policing being there, I think that's important. This is as bad an intersection, in my opinion, as the intersection of Cora Road and Douglas. We had a really big, huge reaction to that intersection. And it's probably worse there because speeding on Cora Road might be worse than speeding on Gore Street. My suggestion there is that when people come into that intersection on Gore and Queen, they're speeding to catch the light at Wellington and Gore. And that's part of the problem here, is people are speeding and they can't respond in due course when people are coming through on Albert. I'd like to know whether we can address the matter of removing the 65. We're looking for an excuse to spend $6,500.
I think, Councillor, you just need to vote against this. Yes. We'll vote against the resolution.
We're going to vote on this.
Get the 60.
I'm just suggesting that we're looking for an excuse to spend.
Do you want this pulled so we could vote on it separately?
Please.
Okay. Are there any other questions on this? Councillor Shoemaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Couple things.
Yes,
First, through you to either Ms. Hamilton Beach or Mr. Rumio, how much would it cost to put lights in there, like traffic lights, full-blown, green, red, yellow?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker, I'm guessing it's in the $100,000 range. Would you think, Susan? Sound?
You said 100,000?
Yeah, 100,000.
At least, yes.
Yeah, because we did leave the conduit in the road in case we're going to put it back. Put the lights back.
I would be the last person to suggest we should put lights back there. I'm simply making the point that there's all this fuss about $6,500 being spent here as a lot of money, but it would cost us way more money. I would suggest to put the lights in. Now, do I think that the $6,500 needs to be spent? Frankly, I don't. I think our staff's doing a fine job monitoring the intersection. They've done everything we've asked them to. We've seen this at Conmee and Carmen's Way. We've seen this at Andrew and Queen Street. The accident numbers go up and then they go down. So if council is hung up on this $6,500, I would be prepared to move a motion to strike the last sentence of this resolution, which allows staff to just continue to monitor it, but doesn't spend the extra $6,500 on the IBI study.
I guess the way I read this, and Mr. Rumiel, you could confirm this, if we turn this down, they're still going to continue to monitor it because that was passed in other resolutions. Correct?
Yes, we'll continue to monitor the intersection. We're working with the police and
so I don't know that the resolution has to be changed. It's just vote against it if you don't want to spend the 65. If it fails, it continues to be monitored.
Okay, thank you. Then I won't move the amending motion.
Okay, on the same subject, I have Councillor Bruni next.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. To Carl. Carl, wouldn't it be more feasible if we spent the $6,500 on flashing lights there on top of stop signs like further down, as Councillor Grandinetti has mentioned earlier? Why wasn't there a thought of that? I mean, with all these concerns that we have.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, there has been some steps, like incremental steps in enhancing the intersection safety as the accidents have spiked. We've put the burst signs above the stop signs. We've oversized the stop signs, as everybody knows. We could add flashers over top, which I don't know what they would cost, but
because we have that further down on the west by the casino area. Correct?
I think that's the intersection that's referenced in the report is Andrew and Queen, and there are flashing beacons above those stop signs. Yes.
I mean, we're beating this up so much in the last several months. Anyways, that's my question.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I guess, Ms. Hamilton Beach, just on that one, when when we're making the assumption that staff is monitoring this, are you monitoring it in a view that maybe it will need flashing lights ultimately?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to yourself. Yes, it is monitored, and the flashing lights would have another warrant assessment, which at this point does not meet. So
But
that
your
again.
monitoring continues to look at that.
Correct.
And that was my understanding, that the monitoring of this intersection would ultimately have staff come back to us and says, you know, we're going to confirm that everything's good at this intersection and needs to stay the way it is, or we found that maybe we should have flashing lights here. So that's being looked at. That was my understanding. Councilor Bruni, that's it? Same subject, I have Councilor Huppen.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I just have a question that hasn't been brought up tonight. If there's a fatality at that corner over the next whatever time it takes to have the study done, is anybody at risk, any liability? I guess it's for our legal, for NULA.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Kupanen, as long as we've been following the warrants, what we thought was proper at the time, it would be defendable. I'd rather be in a position where we're not sued, but as I always say, it's not a question of whether or not we get sued, it's whether or not we get sued successfully. And I'm satisfied with the work that has been done by staff to date, that it would be defended.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Same subject, Councilor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. What you just mentioned a few moments ago about the monitoring and the report that could come back to staff around, from staff around whether there was a need to enhance further flashing lights, is that part of the ongoing monitoring that you would see regardless of this study?
That's my understanding.
Okay, so
let's get that confirmed from staff.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Myers, yes, we look at all the intersections that we've cut out the traffic signals.
Then I absolutely am of the mind as well. I don't see why we need to spend $6,500 because our staff are doing that monitoring. And the other thing is that it's a timing issue. I really do believe that over time, this is going to dissipate. And again, I think that we sit here at this table at certain times of the year and try to find every nickel and dime we can. And here's $6,500 that to me we don't need to be spending if our staff are doing exactly what you described, because that's what I would like to see. Thank you.
Okay. Same subject, Councillor Kramparich.
My question was answered, but I do have a comment.
Go ahead.
I just want to make a mention about a few years back when we had flashing lights that were installed down in the corner of Baseline in the airport road. Those flashing lights, I believe, are working, and it gives a good perception for those going north or south on that road. And I believe the accidents are nil, if any, over the last couple of years, and probably putting them over at that intersection on the corner of Albert and Gore is probably a good idea to be able to put in. Thank you.
Okay, I have a question for Ms. Nula, and it's kind of the opposite of the question that was asked about liability. If this intersection continues the way it goes, are we liable if something happens? My question is, if staff recommends certain signalization at an intersection and council changes it because council thinks there should be lights there instead of stop signs, and then there is a collision, then are we liable? Or are we more liable?
To answer your question, Mr. Acting Mayor, it would, of course, it's going to depend on the facts of the case, but if the decision made by council was made purely for, let's say, economic reasons or purely for political reasons, as opposed to those that would be based in experience and fact, that's going to be a hit at trial, absolutely.
And would staff not be hard-pressed to defend council's decision to change what they had recommended?
It would be staff's, when it would go to court, the staff position would remain steady, that staff's recommendation was X. And what would be paramount, I think, in your scenario would be the reason for which council went in a different direction. And as long as that was a meritorious reason, it's defendable also. That's why staff reports to council. When we just give recommendations, we don't make the decisions.
Okay.
But if it was completely unfettered without any thought given to the rationale behind it, and in my time here, I've never seen a decision like that from this council. So it would also be defendable, but yeah, we'd have a bit of a hurdle to clear why staff's experienced recommendation wasn't abided by.
All right, thanks. Council, we ready to vote on this? Did we read the resolution?
I'll read it, Mr. Acting Mayor. Motion by Councillors Hupinen and Turco, resolve that the report of the design and construction engineer be received and that the city continue to monitor the intersections of Gore Street, Albert Street, and Andrew Street, Albert Street, and further that the city adds intersection safety studies conducted by IBI Group to the downtown traffic study already underway, increasing the fee limit to $107,410.
All in favor? Opposed?
The motion is defeated.
All right. Next item.
We can re-enter consent now.
Okay, I have Councillor Christian on 6.4. That's all I have on the list so far. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I guess I'd direct my questions to Mr. Elliott, who's the author of the report. Thank you for the report. In the analysis, it says that the Planning Division had hoped to apply to the Federation of Canadian Municipalities Climate Innovation Fund to be used on Bay Street multi-use trail and amenities. It says that the fund is currently under reevaluation with anticipated intake for fall of 2018, which means we can reapply. I guess my question is, can you tell me why it's being reevaluated? What are the conditions or the circumstances behind that, if you know? And do we have any idea of what the intake requirements will be come fall of 2018?
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, no, I don't have that information. This portion of the report, I got the assistance of Mr. McConnell in the wording.
Okay.
But I'm sure that he will monitor this and he will know whether we're eligible or not, and if we are, he will be applying in the fall. I'm certain of that.
I'm just wondering, given that this is before, if we could get that information in due course. It is relative in terms of the dollars that we're looking for, so I'm hoping that we can get that information as a report once we know it. Okay, thank you. Just one or two more questions on the capital, or 6.4. It says that we're deferring Bay Street reconstruction for obvious reasons, reinstating Simpson Street, and that means decreased in $2.3 million in the capital budget for 2018. Mr. Elliott, can you tell me, just refresh my memory, what was the Bay Street project projected to cost, and what is the Simpson project projected to cost? Just so I can get that 2.3 in perspective.
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Christian, I'm just grabbing numbers here. I think Bay Street was, including the grant money, was in excess of $5 million.
Okay.
Your city funds were around 3.4, 3.5, I believe. Simpson is in the range of between 2.5, thereabouts.
Okay. All right. Thank you. That's it for my questions on 6.4.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. On the same 6.4. Again, to Don Elliott through our acting mayor. With this update that we're now focusing on Simpson and going to delay or defer Bay Street, on our website, the city website, do we have a listing of all the roads that we're going to be focusing on for this year? And if we do, I'm under the assumption that it'll be updated for our citizens to refer to. And the reason I'm asking is because someone did actually call me today about Simpson, and also they were asking at the same time about McNabb Street. So do we have a list on our website?
Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'll check if it's listed and it's incorrectly listed after this evening, we'll have it corrected. We'll have it changed. I'm not certain if it's there or not.
Okay. And, okay, thank you.
Council, anything else? Oh, Councillor Fata.
I just have a question that I would ask Mr. Elliott, and maybe you can answer this question on behalf of the residents of Second Avenue in the West End, why we're not completing the rest, what's left, that small piece that's left on Second Avenue, but yet we're jumping into another huge project over in Ward 2.
Mr. Mayor to Mr. Acting Mayor to Councillor Fata, sometimes we have to fit projects financially into a plan, and Simpson is the best one here. I can tell you that we're very seriously considering, we're in the process now of doing a 5-year capital works plan, and we're very seriously considering including the last block of Second Avenue in that plan.
Okay.
I intend to bring that report sometime in June.
Thank you.
Any other items on consent? Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Let's see here.
Maybe you don't have any.
I just actually just a comment about item 6.5, Black Road EA. So can I make a comment?
Go ahead.
Okay. I just want to reemphasize the importance of having cycling or active cycling in this city. And so I understand that Black Road, the overall, I guess the municipality, or no, sorry, our application was relooked at and that we have to consider bike lanes. Is that correct?
Mr. Acting Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth, we have considered bike lanes on that. We are providing cycling lanes on Black Road. There's going to be full paved shoulders all the way. Whether they'll be designated and painted as such, that will be something that we need to recommend to you, but they will be there. The cyclists will be using the shoulder. And the intention on the third line portion of this corridor, between the hospital entrance and Black Road, the intention there is to have an off-road trail sidewalk facility for that purpose as well. So in our view, it's all covered.
Okay, great. So it sounds like that's part of the master plan, is it not, for our cycling master plan? Was that identified in the master plan? Would you know?
Mr. Acting Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth, I'm not sure if it's, I believe those are designated as at least secondary cycling routes. So yeah, that's I think it's abundantly evident that those are good cycling routes and they should be provided as such.
Okay. And I guess I am asking one more question. When do you anticipate the Black Road to continue on? When can we start seeing some work being done on the Black Road, the expansion and so forth?
Mr. Acting Mayor to Councillor Hollingsworth, the Black Road corridor, all of Black Road may proceed this summer. The only hurdle left on Black Road is the Connect and Link funding for the section between McNabb and Second Line. The portion between Second Line and Third Line is a go.
Okay.
So it will be redone this summer.
Okay. And we're just waiting again for funding from the province. Is that correct?
Connecting Link funding, we've applied for Connecting Link funding between for the section between McNabb and Second Line, which will be widened to 4 lanes.
Okay. And any idea when we may hear that?
I routinely ask them for information on that, and they routinely tell me they're waiting for higher ups.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, Council, anything else on consent? Councillor Grandinetti.
6-11, Mr. Acting Mayor.
611? 611, that was pulled.
Yeah, okay.
It's going to the next. That's it, Councillor Grandinetti?
Yeah.
Councillor Harlingsworth.
Great, thank you. I just had one. Through you, Acting Mayor, to our City Clerk, Mr. Malcolm White. I believe it's 6.3, 2018 municipal election and so forth. Mr. White, can you just re-educate me on this part? It talks about an unorganized municipal territory. What is an unorganized municipal territory?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, it's a territory without municipal organization, so there isn't a municipal council. It's not incorporated. It's a city in it, basically the area to the north of Sault Ste. Marie, between Sault Ste. Marie and Montreal River. It's unorganized territory.
Okay. And so if I understand correctly, we have been asking Algoma School or Algoma Board to help us with those types of elections?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, it's the responsibility of the school board to administrate those elections in areas without municipal organization. And that's what the Algoma District School Board has done that on behalf of all the boards in the area for probably a very long time. It was easier for the school boards to do that when they also had the responsibility for collecting taxes from those areas. That function has been uploaded to the province some time ago. And the problem the school boards are facing now is that the staff that they used to have doing those functions and the staff that had that experience have been slowly retiring and moving on. That is why the Algoma District School Board has made the request to us to administrate that election for them.
Okay. And if we go ahead and administrate, obviously, will we charge a fee? Will we be compensated?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, yes. The motion before you tonight is to authorize us to negotiate an agreement with the Algoma District School Board. As noted in the report, we would seek in the agreement to be remunerated for all direct and indirect costs involved in administrating their election.
Okay, thank you. And may I ask one question? It's not to do with the unorganized municipal elections, to do with our election. May I have that favor to ask a question?
It's up to you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
I'm sorry, on what?
Yeah. I have a question, one question relating to our upcoming election. It's nothing to do with unorganized municipal territory. It's to do more with our election. May I have your permission to ask this question?
Go ahead.
Thank you. To you again, City Clerk, Mr. Malcolm White. As everyone knows, our election's coming up and our boundaries have been changed. Can you give us an idea of when some education will take place to remind our constituents of the new areas?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, you will see those sorts of communication outreaches and education beginning in April. Right now, staff is still busy finishing off revising the voting subdivision part of those new ward boundaries. Once we have that completed, then we can go ahead and print new mapping products and start the communications process. People will be able to file nominations starting on May 1st, so we will have that information out ahead of that point.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. It appears that's all the questions on consent.
The motion by Councillors Hoopen and Turco resolved that all items listed under date 2018-0305, agenda item 6, consent agenda, be approved as recommended, save and accept items 6.7 and 6.11.
Council, all in favor? That's carried.
Council, that brings us to section 8 of the agenda. Under 8.1, driveway snow removal, a motion by Councillors Myers and Christian. Whereas for a number of years, City Council has provided $50,000 in funding to a service provider, the Red Cross, to support residential snow removal for seniors. And whereas there are a number of seniors and individuals with medical needs who are able to remain living at home because of this support. And whereas there is an increasing number of members of our community who require additional affordable snow removal services at their residence during exceptional snow events to address matters such as extra heavy snowfall or road cutting that goes beyond what a domestic snowblower can remove and beyond what they can afford. And whereas it is the will of council to look at options for providing further snow management assistance to qualifying residents through our current or new homemaker service provider. Now therefore be it resolved that appropriate city staff be requested to review the current program for assistance provided through the Red Cross and report back to council as follows. 1, how is the current city funding being used? What is the process for an individual to receive assistance and for what service? 2, Red Cross has advised effective March 2018 that they will no longer be the service provider, so what will happen to the city's $50,000 funding? And 3, provide options from the third-party homemaker service provider as to how much it would cost to expand the current program to offer windrow removal, considering the Brantford model or any other approach deemed optional. Mr. Acting Mayor, members of council, I know Deputy CAO Bear has a further update that he received from the Red Cross late this afternoon.
Mr. Bear.
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to City Council. I spoke with Diane Lejam and also received an email from her. Diane's the Deputy Director of Community Health and Wellness and Indigenous Relationships at the Red Cross. She let me know that the Red Cross is able to continue to be the authorized contract entity with the City of Sault Ste. Marie, that the $50,000 that the city puts towards the program is leveraged, 80-20 split with the province. And while they'll be the administrator of the program, the snow removal program will be transitioned to the Victorian Order of Nurses, April 1st, 2018. And all clients, staff, and contractors are aware of this change and are moving forward under that revised reporting relationship. The Canadian Red Cross is agreeable to maintain the agreement with the city to fund those clients receiving that support and also administering the program depending on the different criteria of the program. And they will gather the information from the other two providers and submit monthly reports and quarterly invoices to the city on behalf of the entire program. There's also the home help part of the program, which will be shared by the Canadian Red Cross and the March of Dimes based on geography of the client. So it's, I think, positive news that the service agencies are able to continue the program, and the city's investment will be continue to be able to be used to not only provide the snow removal for eligible clients, but also to lever some other money for home help services.
Thank you, Mr. Ver. Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Council, I just want to draw your attention to the attachment that was with the this item. It's the attachment from the City of Thunder Bay, because it's a very thorough report that's very similar to what we're asking of here. And in this report, as you saw, they break it down and they talk about something. The first thing, and I'm going to call upon our treasurer to comment on it. She and I have had some conversation, plus she sent some information about what we do here. But this report from Thunder Bay first talks about an existing tax credit program for low-income seniors and low-income persons with disabilities. And what their approach was, they looked at several different scenarios. They've got the same kind of issues we have, and yet, shockingly, they don't have nearly as much snow as we have, which I learned. I always assumed that Thunder Bay had the same kind of snowfall as we do, because they're also beside that big lake. But I guess because they're at the top of the lake and we're on the leeward east side of the lake, it affects quite differently, like to the tune of about 160 centimeters in Thunder Bay, and is it 332 or 340 in the Sioux? I was really shocked at that differential. But anyway, point being, they still have the same kind of issues, and they walked through looking at the same things that Mr. Girardi spoke to us about before, but even with some more detail around the snow clearing attachment and road operations for snow that would involve things like having a plow follow with a truck, and they even looked at doing it by hand. And all of those things were hugely unaffordable. But the thing that intrigued me and what their council did end up approving was extending expanding, if you like, their tax credit. And they increased their tax credit that they currently have by $200, and it was an $80,000 budget item, which was far cheaper than dealing with all of these other options. So I'm going to ask at this point, Mr. Acting Mayor, if I can ask our treasurer just to comment on that, because we have a program here too that's similar. And could I ask Ms. Schell to tax credit that can be possibly considered by council?
To you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor, the tax credit that you're referring to, there's two types of things. There was a report actually, just to go back a bit, in 2013 that responded to actually a resolution from Councillor Myers and Councillor Mick at the time in how to address some issues for seniors. The city used to have what was called an elderly tax credit, but it was repealed in 1996. The recommendation of this report was not to add it back because it wasn't affordable for the community. We do have what's called a tax deferral program, and I think that's the credit that you're referring to now. And that is for low-income seniors, and you must be 65 years of age or older by the December 31st of the year, and be receiving the federal government income supplement, and also be established as old age security. This low-income disabled person is a person receiving amounts under the Ontario Disability Support Program. So basically, it just defers your taxes, and it's just the increase in the taxes each year that can be deferred. That's the program we have right now. It doesn't necessarily address snow removal. It does allow some leeway in taxes to individuals. But that is the only program we have in place at this time. And the report, like I said, did go into some other items, such as the different plans. At the time, there was an Oshawa plan, and they were looking at a tax deferral, a tax grant program, etc. Thunder Bay, as the councillor has mentioned, is also looking at expanding theirs. But the result of this report at that time was that it was not affordable, and that there were other tax credits that were given by the province that provided some assistance to seniors that could be used for this.
Thank you. Yeah, and I guess I just wanted council, especially those who weren't here in 13 that saw that report, to be updated a little bit that we have looked at this in the past, but 5 years ago, our community was in a different position than it is right now. And I really think that this council has done a tremendous amount of work at looking at services. And the whole motivation I have behind all of this is, and I've had this discussion with Diane Lejam a couple of times, we've met and talked, or telephone meetings and talked, is that we all recognize who is in our houses now as residents in their homes has changed dramatically from certainly when I was growing up. I had two older brothers who were out there with the shovel, and a lot of the men around this room tonight were out there with their shovels, shoveling their driveways by hand in those days. Those days are over, and you don't have that same kind of resident in the houses anymore. You've got older people that are trying to stay in their house. We heard from Ron Gagnon that we need 2 more Davy homes in the next 3 years for seniors to live in. We want to encourage seniors to stay in their home. So if we can at all, at this council, start to get the mindset of looking at what can we do to expand services, this is the discussion I want to get down to. So when we get a report back that's asked for in the resolution, I know that Mr. Vare is going to give some consideration to also the discussion, I think he's heard at 2 different meetings, tonight and the other one, around what could be included in that report. And I really want to see us look at all kinds of options as to how we can help the seniors with the snow management and with those who have the physical disabilities. And Diane told me that we really average about 100. She averages about 100 on the snow portion of the program who are there now. They have a very small wait list at the moment. But she said the wait list, lack of a wait list is misleading because people need their snow removed. So if they contact the Red Cross and they can't give them the service, they have to find some means. And literally, some of them may be having to make a decision as to whether they can buy these many groceries or whether they can pay someone to do their driveway to the full commercial rate that's out there without the assistance from the city and the Red Cross. So, Council, I'm looking forward to the report coming back, but there's a lot, this is a complex issue. There's a lot to it. And I think there's a number of things we have to consider. And the tax credit is something we can still consider. As I say, Thunder Bay just approved it at their council, and it's an $80,000 item. It's a $200 tax credit, so the residents can use it towards whatever they need to do on their snow management. And they have a caseload at their Red Cross in Thunder Bay of over 200 people. So they've looked at the options. They're delivering services right now through Red Cross, through VON, but this assistance from the city up there is taking the form of a direct credit to the residents. So thank you. I'm sorry for that long introduction there, Mr. Acting Mayor, but I think that the report back is going to spur a lot more discussion. I'm hoping by 2019 budget deliberations, council can have come with some kind of a plan that we think will help address the issues of not only the entryways of the driveways, that's part of the issue, but actually the whole snow removal program. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Butler.
Yes, I think I've been part of this is the 15th run at this, and it was open-ended at the first time, the 10th time, and I suspect it may very well be this time. And we did look at this tax deferral system, and if we were to give that to senior citizens, there's absolutely no guarantee, and I suspect they wouldn't say, gee, my first priority is to get the snow removed from my driveway. So I don't think that's a starter. I want to thank the Red Cross for doing what they have been doing on $50,000. And how is it decided? Well, it's a means test. If you make application, you have to go into the Red Cross and say, this is how much money I take in, et cetera, et cetera. And it's still not free to anybody who qualifies. It's a subsidized removal of the windrows, or call it whatever you will. So we have 30,000 driveways, I'm told, and I don't want to raise expectations too high that we're going to be able to address it. We could, if we buy more equipment, spend a whole lot more money, and hire more staff, and then we can do it. And I'm told from time to time, that's $1 million. I don't believe we're going to do it. But I'd like to think, and some of these other ideas, what other cities have done, Brantford and this kind of equipment, and I've had phone calls, you use the sidewalk plow and go behind it. Some of them, most of them are totally impractical, just not feasible to do. So as much as I think we all want to help people, and yes, we are getting older, as I can well attest, but also the disabled or the people with health difficulties. And I say, well, how do we do it? Well, one way of doing it is increase the $50,000. It is successful. It's going to the VON. It'll be up it to $100,000. And DSAB, I'm told, leverages a whole lot more money to deal with more people. And I think that is something we should do. But again, to offer any expectations that we can do the whole city. And we do more now, I think, than we have done in past years. When there's the 2-foot rule, affectionately called, no, I won't call it anything, Susan Hamilton Beach will get upset with me. I call it the Butler rule, but they don't. It's good, but it's very subjective. Somebody has to go out and say, yes, this is too high, let's deal with it. But when you do one person's, you have to do the whole roadway. So it's a bit of but it's a piecemeal approach. We want to do something, we have to spend more money. And how high do you want to go? That's how many more driveways we'll be able to do. And I think rather than us kicking run at it, run after run after run, that's what we have to say. Are we going to put more money into this? Yay or nay? And I keep bothering finance to say, hey, what's the surplus? And they still haven't determined that yet. What a great access of monies to do some good work for the community with money that we have some convoluted, I know I repeat myself, I don't really care. We have convoluted resolution. We put so money over here, so much over here, and so much over here. Let's do where we can do some good work for the people of the community. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are we ready to vote? All in favor? All in favor? Carried. Opposed?
Mr. Acting Mayor, members of council, agenda item 8.2, use a realtor for property sales. A motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Butland. Whereas the City of Sault Ste. Marie has a process in place to dispose of surplus land, and whereas the city's policy on the disposition of surplus land does not take into consideration whether the property is a small parcel of land or a developable parcel of land in determining how to market the surplus land, and whereas developable parcels of land can draw greater interest if advertised through professional realtors, and whereas any parcel of land in excess of 400 meters squared should be considered developable, now therefore be it resolved that city staff, with input from the Sault Ste. Marie Real Estate Board, be requested to develop a policy whereby surplus city land is advertised for sale with local realtors in order to maximize the value for taxpayers in the sale of said land.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. This was really brought to my attention when we disposed of our 3 pieces of property that we had that were the former childcare sites. There was Jesse Irving, the one behind St. Basil's, and the other one escapes me at the moment. But it was. We have a procedure, which is that we put these properties in the Sault Ste. For 10 days, I think it is, and we accept bids, and then the highest bid wins. But in fact, as it was suggested to me, that often precludes people from out of town from seeing the advertisement, whereas if you've got a realtor marketing the property, knowing what the needs of the community and what the needs of buyers in town are, they might be able to pinpoint a purchaser and direct them to this piece of property. And it's not to suggest that our legal department is doing anything wrong in the way it's disposing of land at the moment. They're following the procedure. I think the procedure can be enhanced, which could mean, first off, it means potentially more money for the city if we can get better prices on marketed pieces of land. And it's supporting local business by supporting local realtors who will have incentive to dispose of and sell these pieces of property for the commission that they would receive. So it's a win-win for the city and for the local real estate practice. And, you know, we use professionals, outside professionals, very often when we have legal work to do, when we have engineering work to do. And when we have to dispose of property, we're using the resources we have, and they do excellent legal work, but they are not realtors. And so I think they, frankly, would welcome some professional real estate assistance in getting rid of property. And it's only for pieces of property that are in excess of 400 meters squared, which is about the size of a piece of city land, as we call it. It's about 50 by 100. This, I think, is a great resolution to support our local real estate industry and to hopefully maximize the value that we're getting for these pieces of property.
Okay, I wanted to make council aware that there was additional correspondence from the mayor went on in his addendum. Councillor Butland?
Yes, very supportive of this. Our staff has done this in the past, attempted to sell surplus of properties, and no slight on staff. We haven't been terribly successful at it because that isn't a priority for them. They're not trained salespeople to go and say, you have to sell this property. Not a priority. Real estate folk, it's their livelihood. That's what they do for a living. So they'll work at it, there's no doubt. And it's a good private-public partnership. I think this is totally appropriate. And our Geomatic Center upstairs will give us almost instantly all of the properties, and that's the only thing about this resolution. I say the size of the property, don't keep it to that small a parameter. They will give you in 15 minutes here are the size of properties that are available at this size, and this size, and these are the ones that are considered surplus. So, yes, let's go at it. I think we have an inventory now. We've been working on that, so let's get together with our real estate friends, and I think they can bring some monies back for them and for us too. Thanks, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I guess my concern is, how is a real estate company picked? Does it go out to tender? Does there have to be some type of credentials that they have, qualifications? Do we just pick any real estate? I mean, I think we have to come up with an RFP, RFQ. To spread the wealth, it would be nice, but I think you need a fair system.
Well, is that a question?
That's a question.
Councillor Shoemaker
Question
or
to
to
anybody.
Ms. Kenny?
I'm happy to answer. So,
sure, a lawyer would like to answer.
The motion is for our city staff to work with the real estate board to develop a policy so that there is a process in place. I know historically, when there have been large pieces of property to sell, there has been a rotation of some sorts within the local real estate board that goes between different brokerages, different agents within the brokerage. So this really is to ask our staff to come up with that system and bring it back to us.
So to the acting mayor, so we're just asking for them to come back with a report, basically
a policy.
A policy. And
No,
then,
it's more than a report. It's to go ahead and come back with a policy to have the real estate agents involved in brokering our property. It's more than a report, it's policy.
I would like to see a report if you want to have a friendly
Can
amendment
maybe we
to it.
just ask, Ms. Kenny, I don't know if this is fair, but can you comment on this from your perspective? Is this something that, I guess, why haven't we been there in the past? Is there a stumbling block in this somewhere?
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. There was a time when the legal department was, there was another division, and it was a property division, and we were much more actively involved in properties. And we had a couple of people that, while they weren't realtors, they really did have an expertise or developed an expertise over time about valuing property, buying and selling property. And right now you have a team of lawyers that buy and sell a fair amount of property, but we really do not have an expertise in valuations or certainly in marketing. So I think we'd be better able to market property with the assistance of a realtor or someone like that, particularly given the cost that's now associated with buying and selling property, particularly with a municipal. We just took turns. We just went on this rotational. So if it's an exercise in determining what's the best process, we can do that.
I was just getting down the next name, Councillor Bruni. Go ahead.
Oh,
I just asked her for a comment.
Oh.
Carry on.
So I guess I'm asking for the mover, if they can make a slight amendment to this. This way, information would come back to us regarding what are the, I don't know, what would you call it? What's the procedure when picking a real estate firm or something?
So,
I just guess for clarification, Mr. Clerk, if this comes back as a policy, we certainly can discuss what council could accept and not accept as the policy, correct?
That's correct, Mr. Acting Mayor.
So maybe those details, Councillor Bruni, that you are not sure would work in this, certainly could be discussed when the report comes back, or the policy comes back, I should say. And if there's something that we don't like in there, we certainly could send it back and.
Okay. All right.
Okay with that?
So we're just basically moving
I
this.
don't want to, I'm not trying to
So what are we
preempt
doing
your
here?
resolution
We're
if you want to amend
So this
something.
are we just moving this for staff to come back with a policy?
With the policy, but we have to adopt that policy when it comes back.
Fair enough.
It's not, in stone once we say go get a policy. We have to approve it.
Because I want to understand the process regarding what real estate company is picked, how do you pick them, et cetera, et
And I
cetera.
think once.
And cost-wise, is it 3%, 6%?
And I think once legal comes back with that policy, we can ask all those questions. And if we're not happy with it, we say, let's
Fair
stay
enough.
where we are.
Yeah, okay.
But again, I don't want to preempt an amendment if you have one.
No.
I have Councillor Myers and then Upland.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I was going back to what the mayor's comments had been because I was wanting to understand a little bit more about the surplus property bylaw. So can we ask you, through you to our solicitor, because did you see the mayor's email? It's on the addendum, on the agenda. Did you see that, Nuala? Maybe not. He's saying that he thinks the most appropriate course for council is to direct staff to review our surplus property bylaw and the way in which the city does market its property and report back to us with an updated bylaw. And then the more substantial marketing process could be part of that. And that's the way I was leaning myself, but he's mentioned that the bylaw is outdated. Is that something that you had on your radar to be looking at, is reviewing the surplus property bylaw and all that goes with it?
Well, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Myers, not per se. We are involved pursuant to a resolution that Councillor Butland brought forward about looking at all the surplus property that's available. But the term marketing, we don't market. We advertise. That's the extent of it.
Yep. Okay. So, because what he's saying is that we need to get that bylaw back because it's outdated. It needs to be updated, the surplus property bylaw. And is there, I know you were asking about surplus property inventory, but is there a resolution? You mentioned a resolution.
I'm going to bring a motion for that one the next meeting.
Okay, well, in light of that, I would defer this until we see that motion, because truthfully, it's like we're getting, we're splitting hairs here. I think that the surplus property bylaw that we have, if it's outdated, it needs to come back, and in it, part of the recommendation may be, it sounds like we're a little bit cart before horse here, so I just wanted to get somebody to enlighten me.
The rest of the correspondence, Councillor Shoemaker had answered the comments from the mayor and that he was going to come back with a separate resolution.
Right. I think they need to be together. I don't know why they'd be separate. So I think we need to see them in tandem. So thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor.
Don't know, Ms. Kenny, if you brought this report back with the resolution that's on our agenda this evening, would you address the bylaw that we have right now at the same time?
Amendment.
To you, Mr. Acting Mayor, if the resolution was passed as is, no, I don't think I'd be turning my mind to that.
How about if we do this? Add the words at the end of this and update the surplus land.
Surplus property bylaw.
Surplus
I
property
think that
bylaw.
would be fair and it would address everything.
Yeah.
And any recommendations thereof, right?
Mr. White, do you have that?
Yes.
Okay, so is that an amendment or just a friendly change in the
It
wording?
was suggested by the mover, so.
A change of wording?
Friendly amendment, yeah.
Just from a housekeeping point of view, it shows Mr. Butland as the mover on the agenda item, but I believe it is Mr. Shoemaker. We probably ought to just housekeep. At least it does on our package here, it shows.
It shows Councillor Shoemaker as the mover.
I see Shoemaker and Butland.
Oh, that's funny.
Okay, Councillor Huppinen.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. I just would like to comment. I think it's a great idea, but I'd like to perhaps try to get the real estate board involved, and I don't want all of the onus put on our staff to come back with something that, we want from the realtors. It's up to the realtors.
The resolution says input from the realtors. It
Okay.
says input, where am I? From the real estate board. with input from the Sault Ste. Marie Real Estate Board be requested.
Okay, so it should be really up to the real estate board then, how they're going to handle who gets what and where, and that would
Well,
be
I think
my...
it should be up to the city, actually, but with input from the Real Estate Board.
Of course, okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to vote on this? All in favor? That's carried.
Under 8.3, James Street and surrounding area revitalization plan. Council, just one note, Councillor Shoemaker did circulate an amended resolution. It's got a very small addition to the third whereas clause. It's a motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Grandinetti. Whereas the CTVW5 program Steel Town Down focused on the opioid crisis across Canada and how it is affecting mid-sized cities like Sault Ste. Marie. And whereas the program featured Sault Ste. Marie's Jamestown neighborhood as one of the areas in Sault Ste. Marie where the use of opioids and other substances is prominent. And whereas the Sault Ste. Marie Innovation Center's GIS department has been presenting data to stakeholders in the community for a number of years on the lack of park services and outdoor recreation activities in the Jamestown area and throughout the downtown core. And whereas the lack of activities in Sault Ste. Marie was cited as one of a wide number of factors that results in individuals turning to substance abuse and ultimately substance abuse in Sault Ste. Marie. And whereas the provision of park services and outdoor recreational activities is an area of direct municipal responsibility and an area where the city can play a leading role in combating part of this issue. Now therefore be it resolved that the Planning Department, in consultation with the Innovation Center's GIS department, be requested to bring forward to City Council forthwith a James Street and surrounding area revitalization plan, including but not limited to possible expansion of Anna Marinelli Park, conversion of unused green space in the area for recreational use, and an examination and assessment of James Street and a recommendation on how to best use James Street as a public space. Sorry, I missed that one. And recommendations on the creation of a park or green space in the downtown core.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. As the motion says, the lack of activities and things to do is one of a wide number of factors that results in individuals turning to substance use and ultimately substance abuse. So I'm not in any way suggesting that we're going to solve the problem by adding green space. We won't. It's a multi-pronged issue, but this is recreational areas are one service that are wholly within the municipal control. Provision of healthcare obviously is provincial, and we're advocating for a new treatment center and supporting the Sault Area Hospital's efforts in that regard. But I do think that what the documentary on W5 showed was that there is a lack of recreational activity in Jamestown, but as was pointed out to me by the GIS division today, not just in Jamestown, but from Dennis to Pym Street and Wellington to the water, everyone that lives in that area lives more than 700 meters away from the nearest park. So it is a significant lack of recreational activities in the downtown core. And the downtown core, as the GIS division also notes for me in some of the data they've provided, is the area of town where there is the highest percentage of renters. 71% to 90% of units downtown are rented. And those are typically folks who don't have either don't have yards or don't have access to the yards and the properties they're renting, further creating a need for recreational activity. The health and well-being results that the GIS division has provided show that the percentage of folks who are vulnerable in terms of physical health and well-being in the downtown core and in the Jamestown area is the highest in the city. In excess of 34% of folks in that area are vulnerable in the physical health and well-being area. So this is by no means the only way that we can tackle this issue. It's one of the ways, and I think it's incumbent on us to tackle it from every angle possible. And I'm going to be bringing more resolutions on this issue. I encourage fellow councillors to bring more resolutions on this issue because we've seen that it is a significant issue. We are, and we have a responsibility, I would say, to our citizens, to our residents, to make sure that we tackle it from every angle possible. And this is one of those angles, and I'm hopeful that council will support it.
I just have a question on where we're directing this resolution. Should it go to planning or should it go to Mr. Vare's department?
Well, I've put planning.
That's the same planning. It's the
Oh,
same
it's the same
department,
division.
but should it be recreation?
So if we change the words planning to, I'm not sure what his department's called, recreation and culture, but yes. Community development and
It's under his
enterprise,
development.
I'm content to do that.
Councillor Bruni.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Just a quick question, and whoever wants to answer the CAO. Do we have right now, are we in the process of doing a green study or a park study? Is that in progress?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Bruni, I'll turn to Mr. Donazo and Mr. Vare to speak, but we are, of course, entering into doing our official plan. We do have a downtown initiative that we're undertaking as well, and we did go through an exercise as part of the 2018 budget, looking at green space and looking at different types of opportunities for investment into that area. I'd look to Mr. Vare or Mr. Donazo if they want to add to that.
Further to the CAO's comments, I was just going to add that staff have been looking at creative ways, recognizing the need in the downtown area and Jamestown area to institute new green space or play areas. If you'll recall, we did talk about some of the projects related to converting some of the parking spots for multi-sport courts and looking at other ways that we can add infrastructure and green space to address the needs in that area.
So wouldn't it be more appropriate for Councillor Shoemaker if we just waited until that report comes forward? I mean, out of your four options here, 3 of them are for green space. So I'd prefer to wait until that report comes forward and then after maybe introduce this resolution back on the floor.
Yes, just to respond to that, the information that I've obtained from the GIS division was given to me as part of the school college board probably about 3.5, 4 years ago. So the GIS division has been ringing the bell on this issue, I would say, for a fairly long time. And staff maybe has turned their attention to it, and I recognize that there are some things in the works, but I am suggesting that it's time that council make this a priority. And frankly, if it has been being worked on, it's taking too long, in my opinion. So let's direct our staff to get to it and to bring us a report back.
Councillor Bruni, any more?
No, I mean, I'm not going to debate with Councillor Shoemaker. His point is valid, very valid. I'm just saying, let's get this report back from staff and let's move forward with it. It has been a long time, and I do agree with you. I would like to see the staff's report come first and then make a decision, but that's up to council to vote on.
Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. I just want to comment, I think we all around this table are very concerned about what was highlighted on that television program. And I think that all of us around this table would like to do what's best for those that live in our city. So my question is this: when you were putting this resolution together, did you consult Mr. Mike Nadeau from the District of Social Services of Agoma to fully understand what wonderful projects and wonderful new initiatives his team is implementing for our city to help these individuals? Have you and did you consult with him?
No, this is Park Services, which is fully within the municipal responsibility, and Mr. Nadeau provides social services, which is exclusively outside of the municipality's responsibility.
Okay, if I may, in all due respect, having a conversation with him will show that he has a partnership with the city and doing some great initiatives for outdoor activities with his clientele. The second point, there's approximately 5 councillors that sit on the DSAP board, District of Social Services of Agoma. 6, correction, thank you, 6. And we are updated quite often on different initiatives that are being completed. I would like to, at this time, ask the question to our city clerk. And I agree with Councillor Bruni. Is there a way that we can put this resolution, defer it until the report comes back? Second, can we invite Mr. Mike Nadeau to council to give us, council, an update on what wonderful initiatives are happening to help these citizens that may need more attention?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, it's within any member of council's purview to put forth a motion for postponement and have it seconded, and then it would be considered. That's the mechanism that is open to any member of council to postpone an item.
Okay, we really can't speak to a deferral unless the motion comes to the floor.
Okay, and just one last piece is the community plans, and again, reiterate, there's a lot of good work that's happening behind the scenes by our staff at Green Space, and there is our community action plan that everybody's working towards that talks about quality of life. I would like to say to give our staff some more time to properly work through some of these wonderful initiatives, and I do not support this motion at this time.
Okay, Councillor Butler.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Green space is not an answer, and I think Councillor Shoemaker has addressed that. This has to be a multi-pronged approach. My experience over the rest of the city is we have all kinds of green space, all kinds of it, but it's got to be repurposed. Nobody is playing in our green spaces anymore. We know where they're playing. They're playing in their house on their data machine, whatever. You know what I'm saying. I can't even say it. You know what? They have to be repurposed. We have to give recreation opportunities, not just create green space, because say it's a good thing to have a lot of green space. There's no doubt about it. But I think if this passes, DSAB will talk to planning or whomever is going to be involved. I think they have a lot of communication, and they can bring whatever is happening out there, bring it forward sooner than later. The reality is these green spaces are not being used. And may I put a plug in? If you have not visited the soup kitchen, go there, and it'll be a very positive experience. And also you ask these people, who the vast majority live in that area, and say, what is it that you think you need to improve your plight in life in this immediate area? And I think they'll tell you, and as I say, it will be a positive experience. Take time to visit, go for lunch someday. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Kompadich.
Thank you, Acting Mayor. I just want to mention, I want to thank Councillor Shoemaker for this resolution, and you know, our municipality has to do everything we possibly can to ensure that people have a park to go to and to get away, and do everything we can to get them away from addiction. Now, the concern I got is that avoiding duplication. Now, we already got a group that's already reviewing this, which is Tom Vare's group, okay? And we're going to be doing extra work that's already been completed on this, and that concerns me, especially with the limited resources that we got in our municipality. And so what I'd like to know is the date of completion that we could get from Mr. Vare on this item, so we can get an idea exactly on what month we're going to be able to do something and possibly implement this item.
Mr. Vare?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Kropotich. So your question was if this resolution passes, when we can get the information back?
No, the current work you're reviewing right now on green space and parks, that's what I want to know, is when we're going to get an answer to when a recommendation and a possible implementation of this.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Kropotich. I believe we had the return of that information in Q3 of this year, if I'm not mistaken, for the report related to the parks.
And was the recommendation in there regarding Jamestown, James Street, that area?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Kropotich, it was a broader look at all the parks, not necessarily just Jamestown, but certainly it would include a review of opportunities in Jamestown as well.
So I guess my next question is when are we going to get an actual report that says when we're going to implement something regarding parks and green space? What is the date? And whether you can answer it or not right now, Tom?
You probably can't.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that's fair right now. He certainly would have to check with staff to see where they are on that. I think the last answer we got was Q3.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks again for the resolution, Matt.
Councillor Bruni.
Councillor Kropotich asked my question, so if we vote in favor of this, does this supersede the report back from Tom? Or is this just basically put on the back burner until that report comes forward? Is there a time period for this? My question. When is the time period?
There is no time period on this. I do believe there's the wording, let me go back to this, it asks for it as soon as possible, and I'm paraphrasing. Forthwith, that's the word I was looking for.
Forthwith.
Forthwith.
Put a date on it.
So it is asking for it in advance of the master plan.
Okay.
Okay, Councillor Myers.
I think the issue is that we're dealing with the same department. Mr. Vare is the Deputy CAO, where this community enterprise and social services comes under, or community services comes under, and again, he's hearing the conversation. I think Mr. Vare realizes that this is something that council's trying to address in the shorter term rather than long term. Third quarter is coming up, maybe more quickly than what we would like to think it is. So, I think that they've got to work in tandem with one another. And as Councillor Hollingsworth mentioned, there's other reports out there and plans as well. And again, they're all in Mr. Vare's bellywick. And now he's got a brand new manager who's going to be, I'm sure, listening at home with his feet up tonight. And that won't happen too many times in the future, eh, Tom? That's right. So he'll be getting his, marching orders, as you're saying, Mr. Butland, but he'll be getting his direction as well. So I think that we're hammering about this. I think we've all got the gist of it. We understand that there's an issue. We want to deal with it as soon as possible. I think Councillor Shoemaker and Councillor Grenanet are quite reasonable in understanding. We're not trying to go off on a one-off over here. We're trying to do it in a context that makes a lot of sense. Come back as soon as we can, great. Forthwith might be third quarter with. So I think that we've got to just move forward with this. We get it.
Okay. Councillor Fata.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to say that I don't think anybody in this room would be not supporting this resolution. Of course, anything that we can do to help the issues that we're dealing with, in particular in this part of the city. Certainly, I look at this and I'm looking at the expansion of the Anna Marinelli Park. I mean, that in itself just speaks volumes. I think that that's something that we can visualize that as being a very positive move
towards, some solutions to the issues that we are trying to address. We're dealing with about 76 parks in Sault Ste. Marie. Now we're looking at putting in a 77th one and perhaps a 78th one. It seems to me that the issue of dealing with the report has to come in sync with this resolution. I don't want to vote against it, but at the same time, I think perhaps a deferral might be more the matter of how to deal with this. I would be interested in knowing what Mike Nadeau has to say on this. I think his input would be very valuable. To put the staff through this exercise, some might say, well, it's not a lot of time that might be spent. I don't know the amount of time that's going to be spent to deal with this resolution, but I do think that we're jumping all over the place here. I think I want to know what's going on with the city as a whole. We may find out that there may be a dozen parks that may actually be recommended for closing and for sale and perhaps use in a way that would sort of develop areas of the city where we can see development taking place on these parks that are not being used. So is the issue of deferral part of this exercise at this moment, or are we going to...
Councillor Fat, I really don't know that we have to defer it.
Mr.
Mayor is telling us that the master plan is probably coming back third quarter. That's July, August, September. Yeah. A new resolution tonight is asking to look at what Councillor Shoemaker wants to look at. I see them probably coming back coincidentally. They're going to be back at the same time.
Okay.
We're putting that much time. Mr. Vera, would you agree that they possibly could mesh?
Right. Well, if council sees that this is not creating
third quarter,
creating work,
June, July, August.
Yeah, I see that. I'm just saying that we're putting the staff through an exercise that's already, in fact, taking place. So we're going to say, well, we're going to throw in another park to this mix. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah. Okay, closing comments, I have Councillor Hollingsworth, and then I think we've...
Thank you. Just a comment. Again, just want to emphasize this is positive. I mean, we are looking out for our citizens throughout our city, so this is positive. I just don't want to see duplication. And there's a lot of good work going on right now by our partners. As Councillor Shoemaker said, Mike Nadeau from DSAP is a partner, but we should consult our partners and we should consult our staff. The other partner that we may want to consult is United Way, because Mr. Mike Delphi, he is working on community gardens, and he's trying to, if I may say, I believe he's trying to create more community gardens within our wonderful city. And I know that the Soup Kitchen, which I have visited and I donate to great cause, they also have had a community garden in the past. I think they had struggles with it, but there has been green space down that. So again, I would like to suggest that we wait till we hear about these other plans, and I will ask the city clerk in an email if Mike Nadeau can be invited to council to give us an update on other initiatives that are taking place in our city, which includes green areas as well as other activities, especially on East Street. Thank you.
Council, we ready to vote on this? Recorded vote? The recorded vote has been called for.
Recorded vote has been requested. Councillor Turco?
For.
Councillor Fata?
For.
Councillor Christian?
Against.
Councillor Krompotich?
For.
Councillor Hupinen?
Against.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Against.
Councillor Grandinetti?
For.
Councillor Shoemaker?
For.
Councillor Bruni?
Against.
Councillor Myers?
For.
Councillor Butland?
For.
Acting Mayor Nero?
For.
Motion carries. Under agenda item 8.4, motion by Councillors Shoemaker and Christian. Whereas the city has faced economic anxiety over the last 2 or more years because of Algoma's CCAA proceedings, and whereas Algoma has set out its desire to emerge from creditor protection in early 2018, And whereas Algoma's emergence from creditor protection will lift the economic cloud that has been hanging over the city since 2016, and whereas Council wishes to capitalize on the improved economic outlook for the city when Algoma emerges from creditor protection, whereas the Economic Development Fund is one of the few tools the city has at its disposal to spur economic activity within the municipality, now therefore be it resolved that Council encourage applications to the Economic Development Fund from facilities seeking to establish advanced manufacturing facilities in Sault Ste. in the Soo, and both the Economic Development Corporation and the city's Community Development and Enterprise Services Department be directed to seek out and encourage applications to the Economic Development Fund from companies in the advanced manufacturing business.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. This is a resolution that I hope is forward-looking and hopeful in its outlook, that we will emerge from CCAA in the near term, and that we will have an economic cloud lifted from above our city sometime soon this year. What this is an invitation to agencies to bring their applications forward to us to leverage that economic cloud being lifted, to support the efforts of the EDC in going out and attracting that type of business, to encourage applications from advanced manufacturing facilities so that we can hit the ground running once Algoma emerges from CCAA. So it is really an invitation, frankly, to anybody out there looking to the Soo for advanced manufacturing to say, the times are changing locally, hopefully, for the better, and let's proceed with this positive economic outlook and welcome these companies to our community, provided, of course, that Mr. Trump, south of the border, does not do anything to hamper those efforts. So hopeful that we will emerge, that we will emerge successfully soon, and that we are inviting companies to come to the Soo, look at us specifically for advanced manufacturing, which is where we are and where we should continue to devote many of our EDC and Mr. Vere's department's attentions.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hollingsworth.
Thank you. Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Shoemaker. Again, I think this is wonderful. I think it's a great time to spread the word that we are open for business. I'm a great believer in that as well. But I just have a couple of questions. How is this similar or not similar to the current Economic Development Fund that's in my hands right now, where it's been in existence for, 2006, roughly speaking, where businesses, existing and new businesses, have applied and have received funding through our Economic Development Fund. I don't understand what the difference, what you're proposing is to this, when this is for new companies, existing companies, advanced manufacturing, technology, all sorts of different companies, which also, I believe, is being revised as we speak by staff. So help me understand what the difference is.
Councillor Shoemaker.
Yes, thank you. As I just said, frankly, this is an invitation to businesses to come look at Sault Ste. Marie now that hopefully this cloud is being lifted from our economy. So is it different? It is within the EDF's purview, but it is specifically asking these companies with advanced manufacturing areas of responsibility to look at the Soo and consider us as a place and to use our EDF to capitalize on that.
Okay, I just have a few more questions. This is now directed to Mr. Tom Vere. Mr. Vere, correct me if I'm wrong, the current Economic Development Fund criteria, is it being rewritten right now or is it being revised?
Through you, Mr. Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that is correct. It is being revised right now. With our recent signing of the MOUs with the Economic Development Corporation, the city will be taking back the administration of the EDF fund, and we've talked about how we can align the EDF fund to fit within the recommendations of the Community Adjustment Committee and the 4 pillars, and also look at improving the fund going forward.
Okay, thank you. Another question for you, Mr. Bear, if you don't mind. Is there, I think you just alluded to it, is there not mention of helping new existing companies in advance, all sorts of different sectors? Is there not already mention it in our People, Place, Prosperity, our community plan? And is there not mention of us working on it already in our corporate strategic plan 2016-2020?
Through you, Acting Mayor, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that is correct. The Economic Growth and Diversity pillar does talk about how we support entrepreneurs and businesses in Sault Ste. Marie moving forward, as well as the corporate strategic plan.
Okay. And 2 other questions, Mr. Bear. So currently, right now, any company that is interested in Sault Ste. Marie, existing or new, currently residing in Sault Ste. Marie or thinking of coming to Sault Ste. Marie, currently can contact the Economic Development Corporation for funding, for advice on how to move here. Is that correct?
Through you, Acting Mayor Nero, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that is correct. And they're working, the EDC is working with a number of companies now on establishing operations in advanced manufacturing in the community. And I would say as well, they're a great resource to not only direct to the EDF, but also how to leverage that funding through organizations like the Northern Ontario Heritage Fund.
Okay. And one last question. The Northern Ontario Angels is a little different, but is there a non-active chapter in Sault Ste. Marie called the Northern Ontario Angels, where they try to link up private investors in companies that are startups or even existing companies?
Through you, Acting Mayor Nero, to Councillor Hollingsworth, that is correct. The Northern Ontario Angels is pan-Northern Ontario, and they have a chapter in Sault Ste. Marie, and they have angel investors that are actively investing in entrepreneurs' ideas and companies.
Okay, thank you. My next question is to our CFO, or Shelley. Would this potentially be seen as bonusing?
We have to be careful as a city. It's probably best that if you need detailed information on bonusing, that it is through the legal department to give their interpretation of it. But the way the EDF was set up before was a flow through to the EDC, because the municipality does have, through the Municipal Act, restrictions as to loaning or gifting money to commercial or industrial organizations.
Okay, thank you. So I just would like to maybe reserve my comments, but this might be just almost duplication. The staff's already working on revising our current policy, which seems to me very similar to what Councillor Shoemaker's trying to do when we already have it in existence. And it's already thread through our strategic plan and our community adjustment plan. Thank you.
Councillor Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Mayor. Yeah, when I saw this, I was a little bit surprised because truthfully, and again, having been on staff for 14 years at EDC, I'm acutely aware of what they do. Being on the board for 8 years, acutely aware of what they do, have done, and it hasn't changed that much from what their mandate is now. The operative words in this resolution say encourage applications to the EDF from various facilities, blah, 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 it goes on to say, and then also to seek out and encourage the applications from companies in advanced manufacturing business. Councillor Hollingsworth has captured it very well, but truthfully, I see this as redundant. I mean, there's absolutely no reason. I think that if council wants to say, you know what, we're putting out a red flag to the public. Hey, come on, we've got this great EDF. We encourage you to apply to it. I don't think we need a resolution to do that. I think that's just part of our messaging as a city councilor to say, you know what, folks, we've got great tools. Please contact our Economic Development Corporation and our Community Enterprise Deputy CAO. You know what, let's not drag this on. This resolution is redundant. Thank you.
Councillor Butland.
Yes, that was the operative word that I was going to say. I believe the resolution is redundant, but it does focus, advertise that the EDF fund, we don't talk about it a whole lot. Just tell people it's out here, you can come apply for it, whether you're in town or out of town. And EDC is already doing this, they encourage people, but again, letting the world know that there are monies available. The only thing that I don't agree with totally, I mean, no, I'll vote for this because it's International Women's Day, it's a motherhood issue. But not just advanced manufacturing. The job opportunities are more in IT now than anything else. So anybody, be it retail or any kind of commercial, industrial, manufacturing, whatever, the EDF fund is available to you if you're going to create job opportunities.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Christian.
When Councillor Shoemaker brought this forward, I asked that same question. And I admit that the EDF fund, I think, would perform well the way it is now without this resolution, and it may not be required, but nevertheless, I looked at this and I said, well, it's on the table, and we're speaking about it tonight, and it's just another mechanism to get it out there. And so I look at this as an endorsement of the EDF, and at this point, if it's on the table, what signal are we sending if we don't approve it? So it's here, let's just move on and approve it.
Absolutely. Councillor Fada.
I certainly have to go along with what Councillor Myers and Butland have to say. I think it sounds like we're stepping on the toes of Dan Hollingsworth and John Fabrero and staff, and telling them we expect you guys to act and do your job. What are we going to do through this exercise, Mr. Acting Mayor? We're just going to say that we're just reminding you that there's an EDF fund, and we want you to be on those phones contacting prospective clients. What will it, I mean, will it cost anything? No, it won't. It's easy to vote for it, and that's fine. That's not a big deal. But I think there are people out there that ask me and comment quite often about the EDC. What are they accomplishing? Are they looking at all possible avenues, all possibilities? I've had people give me ideas and discuss ideas with me that I wonder, and I have to sit down with Dan Hollingsworth and with John Fabrero and find out if they're looking through all the different possibilities that are out there. But are we going to sit here and question whether they're doing the obvious, whether they're dealing with their responsibilities and knowing that they can access the EDF fund if it's necessary? They're going to be the first people to bring it forward and say, yes, we have an opportunity here. It will require use of those funds. What are we really? What's the purpose of this exercise?
We're just throwing some support out there that we want to encourage applications to the EDF.
I just hope
it's quite simple.
Yeah,
I
understand.
Councillor Fada, I don't think we're stepping on anybody's toes. I think we're throwing our support again.
What are we highlighting here that somebody who's supposed to be doing this each and every day isn't already aware of?
Call a question.
Recorded vote.
If you're calling a question, a recorded vote's been called for.
A recorded vote has been requested. Councillor Butland?
For.
Councillor Myers?
For.
Councillor Bruni?
For.
Councillor Shoemaker?
For.
Councillor Grandinetti?
For.
Councillor Hollingsworth?
Against.
Councillor Hupinen?
For.
Councillor Krombatic?
For.
Councillor Christian?
For.
Councillor Fada?
Against.
Councillor Turco?
For.
Acting Mayor Nero?
For.
Motion passes. Under agenda item 8.6, Great Lakes cleanup. A motion by Councillors Butland and Christian. Whereas U.S. President Trump has indicated his intent to reduce the Great Lakes funding for cleanup by 90%, present allocation $300 million. And whereas this decision would negatively impact tourism, the environment, agriculture, drinking water, jobs, animal habitat, and would halt the considerable progress made in anti-pollution initiatives, now therefore be it resolved that Mayor Provenzano be authorized to send a letter of grave concern to the appropriate Canadian and American politicians expressing City Council's vehement disapproval of such a decision.
Councillor Butler.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Mayor, it was indicated to me that we had passed a similar resolution some time ago when we had the joint Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario Council Commission meeting. That was then, and this is now. The result of that resolution, of course, not just because of that resolution, but the politicians in the Great Lakes area rose together, Democratic and Republican, and said, don't do this, Mr. President, and they did not cut the Great Lakes Cleanup Fund. So the President is once again revisiting this and saying, cut 90%. So any progress we made, it's considerable setback, and it's obviously a major environmental but also economic issue. As I wrote this, about 3 days later, we really got trumped, because then came the steel tariffs and and say, hey, this pales in comparison. Maybe I shouldn't mix economics, environment, but they do mix and they are important together. And I think I was glad to see the mayor and the MP and the MPP working together to say, hey, what can be done about this? And I gather the president will be saying something this week, maybe. Hopefully he will change his mind, as he often does. But there are some strategies that I'd like to say we're working on that hopefully we can. This would be exceedingly bad news for Sault Ste. Marie, Hamilton, folks in Regina, and a couple of mills in Montreal. So this is important, Mr. Mayor, but it now pales in comparison. Thank you.
Okay, we ready to vote? All in favor? Carried.
That brings us to the bylaws portion of the agenda. Mr. Mayor, we do have to vote on two bylaws separately. The first one is 11.1.1. Motion by Councillor Shoemaker and Councillor Turco. Oh, sorry, Councillor Turco was on it. So we'll just use Councillor Hoopanen as a courtesy seconder. Resolve that bylaw 2018-39 being a bylaw to appoint municipal law enforcement officers to enforce the bylaws on various private properties and to amend Schedule A to bylaw 90-305 be passed in open council this 5th day of March 2018.
All in favor? That's carried.
This one, Councillor Hoopanen, I'll use you as the mover as Councillor Shoemaker is conflicted. Motion by Councillors Hoopanen and Turco resolved that bylaw 2018-41 being a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement between the city and Marley Investments, Inc. to incorporate insurance and payment of tax provisions into the existing license to occupy agreement be passed in open council this 5th day of March 2018.
All in favor? It's carried.
Motion by Councillors Hoopanen and Turco resolved that all bylaws under item 11 of the agenda under date 2018-0305 be approved, save and except 2018-39 and 2018-41.
All in favor? It's carried.
Council, for the closed session, Councillor Shoemaker has requested an additional item to be put in closed. It involves the potential acquisition of property. I have therefore amended the authorizing resolution to read as follows. A motion by Councillors Hoopanen and Turco resolve that this council proceed into closed session to discuss 2 labor relations employee negotiations items and 1 item concerning a potential acquisition of property. Further be it resolved that should said closed session be adjourned, that council may reconvene in closed session to continue to discuss the same matter without the need for a further authorizing resolution.
All in favor?
And a motion by Councillors Hupenin and Turco resolved that this council now adjourn.
All in favor? It's carried.